A shot zipped past his head, narrowly missing, leaving an indent on the wall mere inches away. He froze, peeking out from cover, scanning the area for any sign of the enemy. Nothing, not a single movement. But still, he didn't feel the least bit safe. There was a more secure stronghold, a bunker only a short dash from where he was squatting. Gripping his weapon close to his chest, Private Mitchell took a deep breath, psyching himself up before rushing across the battlefield towards what he hoped would be better cover. Ducking under a camouflage tarp that covered the entrance, Mitchell was met with a sight of his squad mates, all sitting huddled in the foxhole, some looking dejected and miserable, others cowering in fear, all apart from Sergeant King, who sat cross-legged in one corner, wearing a permanently crazed, wide-eyed stare on his face. An exhausted Private Mitchell sat down with the others, unable to offer more insight than a nod of mutual condolence to his comrades. For a while, the members of MTF Iota-17, the unit codenamed the Greendale Humans, found themselves feeling the simultaneous mix of frightened and bored. Each one of them could have achieved the same sense of anxiety by drinking 10 cups of black coffee, loudly knocking on their drill sergeant's door in the middle of the night, then rushing back to their barracks to hide under their bunks. Movement from outside caused the whole team's heads to swivel, peeking out of a gap in the outer wall of the bunker. They saw the enemy immediately. Two of the ghostly incorporeal figures roaming the battlefield outside, not to be underestimated despite the baggy, oversized tactical gear they wore, and weapons that looked too big for them. And two outside meant the other three were still out there somewhere. One gave a nod to the other, instructing him to scour the area surrounding the bunker. Mitchell was terrified, and all too aware that there were too many of them in the bunker. The enemy was bound to find them soon. All of a sudden, Sergeant King seemed to stir from his strange trance and produced a box of matches. He held out 4 in his hand, keeping them covered so that nobody could tell if they were picking a long one or a short one. The first of MTF Iota-17, Private Davis, reached for a match as they were offered, his heart dropping as Sergeant King pointed it was a short one. Next, Private Byron picked out a match, a long one. Private Mitchell's pulse skyrocketed as Sergeant King offered him the remaining 2, knowing that one would be long, the other short. He reached out and plucked a short one. King explained that the first short straw and the first long straw go. Bad luck, Byron and Davis, but I don't make the rules. Byron, not wanting to be at the mercy of the spirits, protested that those rules seemed made up. But Private Mitchell, even less eager to go out there, affirmed the sergeant's logic. Hanging their heads, both Private Byron and Private Davis gathered up their weapons and sluggishly walked out of the bunker. Moments later, still safe inside, Private Mitchell overheard the enemy taking fire, followed by the sound of splattering and yelps of pain from his 2 fallen squad mates. He offered a concerned look to Sergeant King, whose wide-eyed expression was doing little to ease Mitchell's nerves. They got our boys good, King muttered, rocking slightly. Tagged them like the Bowery Wall. Still, lucky they didn't get hit by the cannonball. Mitchell asked in disbelief whether the enemy really had their hands on a cannon. No, the cannonball's just their name for it, the sergeant said solemnly. I've never seen it myself, but I heard rumors. Apparently these incorporeal delinquents sneak a steel ball in with their ammo. That's their way of keeping things interesting. Who was it that said war is hell, or was it war makes people crazy? Crazy. I was crazy once. Mitchell sighed and asked why they don't just throw in the towel and surrender. You know darn well why, the mad commanding officer barked. Chaos, mass hysteria, a whole new mess for the Foundation to clean up. And you listen here. Maybe you can live with that, but not me. Not on my watch. The private asked to be let in on the battle plan, unsure if he was more scared of Sergeant King or the enemy outside. We should drag one of them in here. Get him to give up enemy intel, King answered in a sinister, unhinged tone. He didn't respond well when told that the intangibility of the enemy may make holding one of them hostage, well, impossible. Still living in a fantasy, are you, Private? King chuckled maniacally and didn't stop for a full, unsettling minute. Look, I've had it up to here with the enemy and their dirty tactics. I say it's time we went full Return of the Jedi. We're the Ewoks and they're the Empire. Now belt up and bear out. Grabbing his weapon, Sergeant King suddenly hopped to his feet and bellowed, letting out a primal scream up towards the heavens. Then he rushed out of the bunker, screaming his own name until a barrage of enemy fire opened up from all directions. Still cowering in the safety of the bunker, Private Mitchell sighed again as he looked at his commanding officer covered in splatters of paint. Fortunately for Mitchell and the rest of MTF Iota-17, the injuries they had sustained in the line of duty were non-fatal, save for a few bruised egos and some stubborn paint stains on their uniforms that took a lot of seltzer water and lemon to wash out. The unfortunate downside, however, was that their defeat led to a localized anomalous event. The perpetrators of that incident, 5 ghost-like entities with a bad habit of painting the town red. Literally. Meet SCP-2629, sometimes more commonly referred to as the 29-Year Paintball War. See if you can guess how it got that nickname. Located on the outskirts of Krakow, Poland, one can find an abandoned building that was previously used as an indoor paintballing venue. But now it's known to the SCP Foundation by its designation of SCP-2629. Inhabiting the location are a number of incorporeal entities, collectively known as SCP-2629-A. These are humanoid in their shape and behavior, but largely intangible. However, there are a few caveats to that which we'll circle back to. As for their appearance, despite being somewhat translucent, facial recognition software deployed by the Foundation has determined that these so-called ghosts bear a resemblance to a group of 5 teenagers, all of whom died during a driving accident. According to local police records, these deaths took place approximately 5 kilometers outside of Krakow, and there are no existing records that indicate the teenagers in question ever frequented the paintball venue, while they were alive anyway. Now, we mentioned not too long ago that these 5 entities aren't entirely incorporeal, or at least they aren't 100% intangible. The exceptions here are the projectiles fired from their weapons. In this case, standard paintballs with no anomalous properties remain physically tangible. They interact with the world in the same way you would expect any normal paintball to, splattering on impact with solid matter, usually a hard surface or a human target. And this exception to intangibility also works the same way in reverse. Any paintballs fired at any of SCP-2629-A will have the same expected effect. Any and all attempts by the SCP Foundation to engage in direct communications with SCP-2629-A have resulted in failure. While they will often engage in banter and trash talk with their opposition during games, they seem to be uninterested in talking about anything other than paintball. During one attempt by Foundation researcher Dr. Ben Kazarinsiak to talk with the entities and ask why they spend eternity in a paintball arena, the only answer given by one of the anomalous ghosts, SCP-2629-A-2, was, "Why not?" Every afternoon at exactly 1 o'clock Central European Time, all members of SCP-2629-A will manifest within SCP-2629. Should they be left unattended, they will begin to roam freely, often gravitating towards the nearby neighborhood. This can lead to an event classified as an ALIF 2629 scenario. However, the occurrence of an ALIF scenario can be averted should the 5 entities be engaged in a game of paintball. It is the only known measure to deter them, and as such, the SCP Foundation has assigned Mobile Task Force Iota-17 to deal with the problem. Every day, all members of MTF Iota-17, the Greendale humans, enter the paintball facility via an underground tunnel. Each of these operatives possesses a high level of proficiency in marksmanship, as well as close-quarters combat utilizing firearms. On top of that, the Foundation insists that MTF troops in this unit also need to be great at paintball. The Foundation's MTF agents must engage the 5 members of SCP-2629-A in a game of paintball shortly after the entities manifest at 1 o'clock. The games follow the traditional capture the flag rules, wherein both teams have a flag that they need to protect, while also being tasked with securing the opposing team's flag. Should the Foundation's pro paintballers be successful in winning the match, then all instances of SCP-2629-A will demanifest peacefully until they return at the same time the following day. But should the 5 ghostly teammates prevail, or if MTF Iota-17 breaks any of the conventional paintball rules, then this will trigger an ALIF 2629 scenario. But exactly how long has this protracted paintball war been going on for? Well, the clue is in the nickname. All the way back in 1988, the SCP Foundation received reports of unusual vandalism taking place in the area near Krakow. That might have been enough to pique their initial interest, but the sudden reported sightings of ghosts by local civilians was what really made them take interest. Descending on the small area outside of Krakow, the Foundation launched a full-scale investigation into SCP-2629. Given what we now know about the anomaly, it seems that with no one to challenge them, The 5 paintballing entities were freed to enact an ALIF 2629 scenario unobstructed. Once the Foundation discovered the site of SCP-2629 and determined it to be the source of the local anomalous activity, they got to work evacuating the immediate vicinity of the abandoned paintball arena and devising containment procedures to keep unwitting civilians from getting caught in the crossfire of an imminent paint-slinging conflict. As far as the public would know, the abandoned SCP-2629 venue was shut down thanks to a hazardous amount of asbestos. Its entrances were sealed off to deter vandals and would-be urban explorers. But in reality, the Foundation was keeping people out so that the first match between their team, MTF Iota-17, and the 5 members of SCP-2629-A could commence. The battle was relentless, paintballs flying in all directions, splattering any in their path. The Foundation lost a lot of good men that day, although they quickly found them again once they'd cleaned up all the paint. In an attempt to shift the tide of battle and turn the odds in the Foundation's favor, MTF operatives rearranged some of the indoor playing field. This, however, was an ill-advised strategic misstep, as messing with the venue's cover violated the established rules of paintball, and doing so caused an ALIF 2629 scenario to begin. In response, a number of ALIF 2629 procedures have been put in place to combat the anomalous event. Staff at Site-19 had to equip the protective paintballing gear stored at their workstations or in lockers around the facility. If any of them couldn't access their gear, the next best thing Foundation personnel could do was cover their eyes and ears until the event passed. Any and all delicate equipment had to be stored for safety purposes. Security staff are tasked with making sure any SCPs that might be vulnerable are kept out of harm's way. The Foundation currently has no way of barring SCP-2629-A's access to areas, thanks to their incorporeality. However, they can be deterred by being presented with an abundance of targets. Staff are to remain on high alert until the ALIF 2629 scenario is over and the all-clear signal sounds. With all this preparation taking place at Site-19 no less, you'd expect an ALIF 2629 scenario to entail something pretty catastrophic. It wasn't always such an issue. During the initial decade following SCP-2629's discovery, the ALIF scenario used to entail the 5 SCP-2629-A entities roaming the nearby area of Krakow and opening fire on people and property with their paintball guns. Hardly a paint-based war crime, but definitely goes an unnecessary extra mile in terms of vandalism. Then again, you try being stuck for an eternity in a paintball arena. Sometimes it's nice to stretch the invisible space where your legs used to be. And by now you've probably made the connection, the unusual vandalism that drew the Foundation to SCP-2629 in the first place was the ghostly teenage paintballers literally painting the town whenever they manifested, only to fade away after a few hours. But that's only what the ALIF scenario used to entail. It happened during the 12th consecutive year of the Paintball War. A third MTF loss against SCP-2629-A caused yet another ALIF scenario to activate. But this time, instead of roaming the local neighborhood, the incorporeal teens' victory sent them to one of the Foundation's most highly guarded facilities, Site-19. Multiple unsuspecting Foundation research personnel were splattered with paint, the first of the Paintball War's casualties to fall outside of a 250-meter radius from SCP-2629. The Foundation launched an inquiry into how these 5 incorporeal anomalies were able to breach the security of Site-19, citing loose lips among MTF Iota-17 about Site-19. As such, they were banned from ever mentioning Foundation operations during their paintball skirmishes with SCP-2629-A. However, the lasting damage was already done, and unlike a paintball splatter, there was no wiping this away or covering it up. Every loss that MTF Iota-17 incurred in the coming years would result in all 5 of SCP-2629-A manifesting within Site-19, celebrating their capture the flag victories by committing paintball retribution against Foundation personnel. Staff and corridors were splattered with paint, and attempts to return paintball fire were unsuccessful in dispersing the incorporeal attackers. One researcher even sustained an eye injury after being struck in the eye by a stray paintball. As the years rolled on, MTF Iota-17's losses began to increase rapidly. More and more ALIF 2629 scenarios were occurring each year. Foundation facilities abruptly and messily redecorated by a volley of paintballs. The Site-19 director issued a communique to the Ethics Committee, requesting the termination of SCP-2629. MTF Iota-17 may have some of the best trained people in the world, but SCP-2629-A have been gaining experience for decades. It was only a matter of time before the skill gap closed. Anyone we recruit to fill a vacancy in MTF Iota 17 is going to need to be able to counter nearly 30 years of paintball experience, and that number is always growing. All 5 of SCP-2629-A had already gotten tired of trashing their own neighborhood, and before long, they'd similarly get bored of trashing Site-19. The question was, once that happened, where would they hit next?
Hey there, thrill seekers! Are you ready to get crazy? Are you ready to get extreme? Are you ready to taste the real hardcore? We here at SCP Explained know that you love a little excitement in your life. You're the kind of stone-cold solid gold bad dude whose idea of a relaxing afternoon is a staring contest with SCP-173. And you're so tough you're gonna make the peanut blink first. You're the kind of person who'd punch SCP-682 and make him apologize for grazing your fist. You wouldn't even back down from the Scarlet King himself, making the Monarch of Ultimate Despair say, "That's pretty cool, man. Respect." But if you want a genuine thrill ride, something that'll really put hair on your chest, you need to get your butt on a truly hardcore roller coaster. What? Too chicken? Afraid of a little motion sickness or something? Or maybe you've been freaked out by some of the so-called horrifying accidents that happened on roller coasters, like the 1972 Big Dipper disaster, or the 1986 Fantasyland Mindbender catastrophe. Get real. When has a little death scared anyone at the SCP Foundation? And besides, nothing is more awesome than an extreme roller coaster. And believe us, any other roller coaster will feel like kiddie stuff compared to the absolute beast that we're gonna tell you about today. If you're a roller coaster novice, maybe you should try something like the Takabisha over in the Fuji-Q Highland theme park in Japan. This baby boasts a 121-degree drop, famous for making people fall out of their seats. Or maybe you want to try something like Yukon Striker over in Canada. This widowmaker of a coaster has floorless seats, a 360-degree flip, 4 inversions, and a 75-meter drop. That's a little too tame for your taste? If you're feeling really brave, you can hop on the King Ka over in the New Jersey Six Flags theme park. You'll get a super fast 90-degree climb, followed by a bone-stripping 139-meter drop, a 129-foot camel hump, and a 270-degree spiral. Ha! That'll give you a healthy dose of vitamin G-force. Why are we telling you all about this? Because compared to SCP-2183, all those coasters are like riding a tricycle with stabilizers in your mom's backyard. There's no coaster more powerful, more thrilling, and more adrenaline-pumping than SCP-2183. Let's take a look at some of the specs. You can find this bad boy in an undisclosed location somewhere in Idaho. This ride is so hardcore, the killjoys over at the SCP Foundation don't want you to ride it. But if the lamos over at the Foundation had their way, nobody would be having any fun. Am I right? Look at how they put the kibosh on the Carnival of Horrors, or as they call it, SCP-823. Anyone who wants to go on one of those rides will just have met the business end of a Foundation sniper rifle. And think about all the kids who've been deprived of the awesome childhood experience of Cragglewood Park, aka SCP-2571, because the Foundation party poopers decided to rain on everybody's parade. It's safe to say that if the Foundation wants to keep you away from it, you're gonna have a dope time with it. And the SCP-2183 roller coaster is no exception. They have the whole park blocked off and patrolled by at least 4 security guards at any given time. People who see this beast in action are given Class F amnestics, and they've spared no expense in suppressing anything about this coaster to end all coasters in the media. But trust us, getting a ride on this thing is totally more than worth getting on the SCP Foundation's bad side. That's right, this killer coaster has a max height of 37.2 meters and a max speed of almost 90 kilometers per hour. You can't drive that fast anywhere but the Autobahn over in Germany. Sure, it may technically be unfinished, but this bad boy still has a physical track length of 798.8 meters. You're probably wondering why we said physical there, right? That's because when it comes to SCP-2183, the real ride starts when the track comes to an end, baby. When the ride starts a-rolling, it blasts down the normal tracks like a bullet. But when the track ends and the carts fire off, they don't fall. No way. The carts keep speeding mid-air, continuing on the intended track from the roller coaster's initial badass blueprints. But that doesn't mean this ride does everything by the books. SCP-2183 is a ride that knows how to party. There's never any predicting the exact ride length, because every time the carts fire off the uncompleted section of track, they take a totally different path back to the start. That makes SCP-2183 officially the most unpredictable roller coaster in the entire world. The shortest recorded length of the non-physical section of track is 1,080 meters. That's almost double the length of the physical track. And the maximum length of the non-physical portion of the track has been 5,460 meters, which is over twice the length of the Nagashima Spa Land Steel Dragon 2000, the longest roller coaster in the world. But we know what you adrenaline junkies are thinking. It ain't just the length that gets a major buff, it's also the height and speed. Top recorded heights on the mid-air tracks have been up to 100 meters, making it the 5th tallest roller coaster in the world. And speeds have reached a face-melting 180 kilometers an hour, making it the 4th fastest roller coaster in the world. But maybe like Shania Twain, that don't impress you much. We get it. You're probably thinking, 5th tallest? 4th fastest? I thought you said this coaster was truly hardcore, SCP explained. But like a good coaster, that's just because we haven't hit you with the big twist yet. That twist being, everything we just told you only applies to when the carts are empty. When someone is actually on this absolute monster of a roller coaster, it starts to do things you wouldn't believe. For you to really understand just how off the rails crazy this train can go, we've got to tell you about D93730, also known as the Rider. When the Rider woke up that morning, neither he nor the Foundation researchers handling him knew he was going to become a legend. As far as D classes go, this guy was actually pretty lucky, seeing that he'd been convicted of one of the less severe crimes that constitute D-class duty. He was actually part of a release program, allowing him to eventually exit the Foundation alive and return to a normal life after he'd been involved in a certain number of studies. It seemed like a pretty fair trade. However, this was a real pearls before swine situation. Any true coasterhead would relish the opportunity to take a joyride on SCP-2183. It'd be the greatest honor of their lives. But for the Rider, all it was a source of sweaty palms and an increased heart rate. Ha! Talk about weak sauce, am I right? He had no idea he was in for the ride of his life, in what would be both the first and last human test of SCP-2183. They sat him down on one of the carts, strapped and buckled him in with the safety bar, and got that baby rolling. When the ride began, the carts took the normal path down the physical portion of the track. But as expected, things got crazy when the carts hit the anomalous portion. Though nobody expected just how crazy this ride would get, least of all our lucky little rider himself. Ha! If he could still talk, I'm sure he would have changed his tune by now. The rider's cart detached from the rest during the mid-air portion and took a sharp right, going off on its own adventure around the rest of the abandoned park. Everybody knew this was going to be something special, because even the Foundation squares had never seen a cart act like this before. It looped around the whole place several times before whizzing through the park like a cruise missile, weaving between rides, stalls, and concession stands with ease. It was traveling blink and you'll miss it fast. This thing wasn't just white knuckle intense, it was broken knuckle intense. The rest of the carts returned to the starting point again and came to a stop, but the rider wasn't getting off that easy. There's a reason we call SCP-2183 the most intense roller coaster in this crazy world of ours. The cart containing the rider went AWOL, heading north out of the park at high speeds, putting it on a disastrous collision course with a nearby town. Well, disastrous if you work for the SCP Foundation. Totally awesome for the rest of us. The thing about a ride on SCP-2183 is that you really get your money's worth. When people nickname this thing the Ride Never Ends, they don't just do that for fun. This ride literally never ends. Over the first few weeks of the rider's ride, the Foundation just tried to suppress news of sightings from spreading. Multiple people around the nearest Idaho towns reported seeing a flying roller coaster cart zipping around the sky. Thankfully for the killjoys of the world, that kind of thing is easily written off as a trick of the mind. But this didn't stop the rider's epic thrill ride from tearing it up all across Idaho. Over the next few months, this party train really hit the road. Metaphorically speaking, of course. This cart constantly remained 120 to 150 meters above the ground and kept traveling at consistent speeds of over 200 kilometers an hour. That makes it roughly tied for the second fastest roller coaster in the world. The people lucky enough to spot this bad boy in action reported that they heard a panicked, terrifying screaming coming from inside the cart as it passed. That's how you know that the rider was having a hell of a time in there. Real shame that anyone who spotted it got a big old dose of Class A amnestics from the Killjoy Brigade. Speaking of those squares, the SCP Foundation tried multiple times to stop the ride and save the rider from this awesome experience. They sent in helicopters and lowered ladders down to him, but the rider, perhaps finally appreciating what a gift he was given here, kept his arms fastened to his sides, his face forced into a permanent grimace. Nobody knew how he could still be alive, despite having no food or water in all this time. Ha! We can only guess it's because SCP-2183 is just that awesome. Anytime these Foundation dweebs try to get near the cart, it immediately undertook evasive maneuvers and got the hell out of there. Nobody could bring this ultimate ride to an end. In the end, the SCP Foundation proved they could take being anti-fun to straight-up military proportions. They approved firing a missile at this piece of coaster dream tech, hoping to finally bring its awesomeness to an end. After making a valiant effort to avoid them, the missile eventually struck the cart. They thought the rider inside was dead, but the cart kept flying for another 4 years before finally crashing 34 kilometers from the rest of the ride. Relatively unscathed, probably after crashing into one of those beefy Idaho pigeons. And as the Foundation would soon find out, the rider was still around too. He just wasn't in the cart anymore. Nope, he was suspended in the air in a seated position 124 meters above the crashed carts. We call him the rider, cause he's still riding to this very day. And if anyone comes within a 50-meter radius of him in any direction, he'll just fly away until he's alone again. We don't know about you, but we think the rider's whole permanent flying situation isn't a horrific purgatory of eternal torment if he's alive under his comatose state. It's actually the ultimate ride. And really, what more could you want out of life, right? Sometimes people working on the site see him sitting in the cars, often only for a split second. He's one with the coaster now. Total nirvana. Like we said before, kids, the ride never ends.
When they were about to face down all manner of things worse than anyone's deepest, darkest nightmares, Alex and the rest of his team did what they could to keep their spirits up. There was an old song they used to hum whenever heading on missions, the low sound of that tune giving them just a marginal boost to their morale. It never did all that much to numb the sense of impending doom the team all collectively felt, but it was better than sitting in a transport unit in silence, letting the dread get to them. Even though it had been a while since Mobile Task Force Epsilon had been dispatched on their current assignment, and they all had hummed it together as they shipped out, Alex found himself trying to remember the words to that old song. Smile through your fear and sorrow, then maybe tomorrow you'll see the sun come shining through. It was pretty hard for Alex to keep a smile on his face after losing so many of his teammates and seeing what the Grinner had done to them. The trail had gone cold again, much to the disdain of the team's commanding officer. Receiving a number of new sightings and witness reports, the SCP Foundation had sent the remaining members of MTF Epsilon, also known under the codename Tierfing Black, out on another hunt for SCP-4910. The creature had been at large for years now, with every attempt the Foundation had made to capture it ending in grisly, gut-churning failure. 57 separate times they had sent their personnel after this anomaly on the loose, and not all of them had come back. Although Alex often found himself thinking of the ones that had returned, and seeing photos of how they had changed in the after-action reports. Not to mention the bodies. Those that made it back ended up looking virtually unrecognizable as human beings. After having seen what happened to them, maybe it was better not to know what gruesome fate had befallen the ones who were still missing in action, he told himself, keeping that train of thought private. Tracking SCP-4910 brought its own plethora of issues, naturally, or the Foundation would have secured it by now. The creature had some way of interfering with recording devices, rendering them completely useless. And of course, that meant that Tierfing Black had little to no clue what the monster actually looked like. Given that it disrupted any and all recording equipment, including cameras and audio devices, the task force's hands were somewhat tied. It forced Alex and his teammates to try and locate it through more old-fashioned means, following up on eyewitness reports, a lot of which led them to a dead end. Every now and then, however, one of these sightings would prove to be genuine. The quickest way to tell was usually if a person living near the place where a report came in from had gone missing lately. Civilians were SCP-4910's main source of food, and a recent disappearance in the area, paired with the sighting of something large and four-legged, usually meant that the beast had come out of hiding to feed again. "All right, listen up, team," Commanding Officer Sawyer announced. With the level of militaristic speed and discipline expected of them by the Foundation, Alex and the other members of the Mobile Task Force quickly filed out of the transport and fell in, ready and waiting to receive their orders. "Now you all know the reason why we're here." Sawyer strode back and forth, arms behind his back as he addressed what was left of his unit, 3 operatives, not including himself. "Even so, it is imperative you don't forget it either. So these are the facts. Today, the anomaly designated as SCP-4910 is still running wild. But if we have anything to say about it, then that sucker won't be running for much longer." The 3 troops gave a quick chant in agreement, although Alex kept quiet, just mouthing along. He wasn't exactly sure that they would actually ever catch up to the Grinner. So little footage of the monster even existed, meaning the team still had little to no clue what this thing was, or if they were even equipped to fight it. And then again, a huge part of him didn't want to ever find SCP-4910, knowing what it had done to the fallen former members of Mobile Task Force Epsilon. "So here's the latest," Commander Sawyer continued, silencing the team. "Approximately 12 hours ago, we received a message from one of the Foundation's field operatives. This agent has been in deep cover living in a nearby town for a number of years." As he spoke, the commanding officer gestured down the high ridge that they had landed on. Far below, sitting in the center of a huge dip in the earth, was a small township. There was barely enough room for more than a few hundred people at most. All around this small urban center, bordering the entire town in an almost perfect circle, was a dense forest. It was ideal cover for the monster, and Alex could see on his teammates' faces that they all knew it too. With them in the town, there was no way they could cover every possible avenue of approach. "This operative, is he the one that called in the eyewitness report?" One of the team, Warren, piped up and asked. "That is correct, Agent Warren," Sawyer confirmed. "That agent has agreed to meet us at a rendezvous a few clicks north of here. The 4 of us will circumnavigate the town, stick to the cover of these woods as we head out to make contact with him. From there, he'll guide us to where the creature was sighted." The team gave little response, just a few low murmurs expressing their collective apprehension. In a strange way, Alex found it comforting that, at the very least, he wasn't the only one having some serious reservations about potentially coming face to face with SCP-4910. "Now, boys," their commander sighed. "I get it. All of us have been trying to catch this freak for a long while, and we've lost a lot of good people from our unit along the way. But we are Turfing Black, you hear me? You all know what that name means. Turfing, as the sword from Norse mythology, cursed to kill every time it was drawn. And that's us. That is exactly what we are gonna do when we finally find this monster. For all our fallen brothers and sisters, by the time we're done with it, the Grinner will be smiling out from the other side of its ugly face. Now let's move out, double time!" With a half-hearted cheer, the squad prepared to start their hike through the forest that encircled the town. The 4 survivors of Mobile Task Force Epsilon fanned out, keeping close enough to see and hear each other, but not too close that they were clustered together. The more they huddled up, the easier it would be to take them out if the Grinner was able to get the jump on them. Although he should have been keeping his eyes forward, looking out for any tracks the creature might have left, Alex couldn't help checking over his shoulder. The sun was getting lower and lower in the sky, the day rapidly turning to night. Before long, their visibility would be compromised, severely limited by the lack of natural light. It was then he looked to his fellow team members, Warren and Jones. Besides Alex himself and the squad's commander, they were the only Turfing Black operatives left. Warren had always been the more brash and outspoken of the group, willing to stand up and question the orders of Commanding Officer Sawyer. Alex could tell Warren was having the same worries about this plan as he was. The thick tree line gave them plenty of cover, but could also easily work to the monster's advantage, allowing it to sneak up and get the drop on the team with relative ease. But both Alex and Warren also knew that if the MTF was pushed back towards the town, they would be trapped, like fish in a barrel, just waiting to be picked off by SCP-4910. Jones was walking slightly ahead of the others, his gaze rapidly scanning back and forth across the forest before them. He was the team's most accomplished tracker, meaning he was always on the lookout for anything that could give them a better idea as to where the Grinner was heading, or if it was nearby. From scratches on tree bark, to series of inhuman, unnatural footprints belonging to a large quadruped beast, and, of course, trails of blood or bodies. If there was a sign, Jones would find it. Much like Alex, the other two operatives had become more than a little jaded with their ongoing hunt for the elusive entity. But on top of that, not either one of them would admit it to the others. They were scared of it too. The things this creature were capable of were enough to make anyone think twice about wanting to find it. As much to quell his own fear and sorrow, as well as that of his teammates, Alex started humming the tune to Smile, just loud enough for them to hear, but quiet enough, he hoped, to not draw any unwanted attention. It was already dark by the time Tearfing Black was beginning to approach the coordinates where they had arranged to meet the Foundation agent. Commander Sawyer had given his troops a silent hand signal, and all of them had lowered their night vision goggles affixed to their helmets. Through the fuzzy green hue of the optics, Jones was the first to spot a figure leaning against a tree, waiting for them in the distance. "Sir," he whispered to Sawyer, catching his attention and then making a gesture towards the vaguely human shape in the shadows ahead of them. Looking to where Jones had pointed, Alex and Warren could see the agent waiting for them. Following their commander's lead, they paced steadily towards the undercover operative. It was only as they stepped closer that they realized he wasn't moving. "Agent Manning?" Sawyer called out to him, trying to keep his voice as hushed and low as possible. No response. Manning was still, propped up against a tree trunk. The team were a few feet from him now, while the commander stepped up to the agent and turned him around by his shoulder, only to recoil at what he saw. Manning's eyes were open but remained unblinking and lifeless. But that was far from the worst thing that had happened to his face. A huge, disproportionate grin had stretched his mouth wider than was natural. Masses of jagged, uneven teeth had taken root, pushing from under his tongue and the roof of his mouth, filling his airways with thick clusters of yellowy white enamel. There were so many new teeth sprouting from Manning's face that new, fixed and unsettling smiles had started to form, splitting open his cheeks. "Back! Back!" Sawyer told his men in an urgent, hushed whisper. "Remember, boys, we don't know how contagious this thing is." Given they had never seen it in the flesh, that was true. All previous failed attempts at bringing in SCP-4910 had ended with victims displaying similar signs of some unknown anomalous infection. Whatever it was, it seemed to have spread from the creature itself, causing human beings to overproduce masses of teeth. This started with new clusters of dentins painfully tearing through the mouth until the victim could no longer speak or breathe properly. If given enough time, the teeth would begin forming elsewhere on the body, below the neck in places they shouldn't be. The lucky ones, not that there were many of them, had managed to get themselves medical attention soon after they had been exposed. Within an hour, maybe two at best, of an encounter with SCP-4910, there was still a chance of saving one of its victims through intensive dental surgery, but 3 or 4 hours afterward, and it would already be too late. Hearing the distant snap of a twig, Jones turned with his weapon raised, arms locked in a combat-ready stance. "Possible contact," he declared, aiming his gun into the deep, shadowy forest. Matching his bearing and targeting the same area, Sawyer gave a hand signal to Alex and Warren, urging them to lock and load. Lifting their rifles, they covered the opposite direction, just in case someone, or something, came dashing out of the forest at them from the other direction. For a few moments, everything was still, although certainly not calm in the last part. Feeling a bead of sweat crawl down the back of his neck, Alex lifted a hand to wipe his face clean, the only sound being the low, panting breaths of the 4 MTF agents. That was when he saw a shadow move, just ahead of him, darting between the trees before vanishing from the view of his optics once again. It was at least the size of a horse, far bigger than Alex had expected, and able to move around astonishingly fast on its 4 legs. "Movement this side," he announced, alerting his teammates. "It's toying with us," Sawyer muttered. "With respect, how is that possible, sir?" Warren asked. "It's an animal, isn't it?" "It's a hunter," Jones replied. "We need to move. Our visibility's no good with all these trees around," the commander whispered. "On my mark, we make our way towards the town."
But sir, we'll be sitting ducks down there. It can flank us from any side, Warren argued. We're better off down there. At least we have streetlights to help see it coming, Alex interjected, mainly just making an excuse to get as far away from the encroaching entity as possible. This isn't up for discussion, Sawyer said, taking command. Head for the town, that's an order. On my count, 3, 2, contact! Jones shouted. The deafening noise and blinding muzzle flash of his weapon firing quickly followed as he sprayed bullets wildly at the shape that was barreling through the forest towards the team. Alex turned to see what was happening, only for Sawyer to yell at the top of his voice, almost drowned out by the gunfire. Go and get out of here now! Obeying his orders, Alex turned his heels and sprinted towards the low orange light of the nearby town, just visible at the edge of the tree line. Warren was next to him, matching his speed, their heavy tactical gear that was strapped to their bodies jostling back and forth each time one foot came down on the forest floor. Glancing back over his shoulder, Alex saw Jones had ceased fire and was running up behind them. Further back was Sawyer, with the Grinner bearing down on him. The commanding officer of Tearfing Black had his weapon raised, fingers squeezing down on the trigger. Every round he fired illuminated part of the forest for a split second. Alex couldn't make out the creature in any great detail, not while also running further and further away, increasing his distance from it. All he could make out from this far was a fleshy, quadrupedal mass galloping straight for Sawyer. He was yelling to get SCP-4910's attention, the sound of his war cries carrying over the night air. As the 3 MTF agents broke through the tree line and reached the edge of the forest, their commander's shouts quickly turned into screams of intense pain and unspeakable horror, and then fell silent. Alex wasn't sure if the creature had attacked and eaten him, or caused more of those unnatural teeth to fill Sawyer's mouth, blocking his screams permanently. Reaching the town, every road was completely deserted, gently lit by the dim glow of orange streetlights. Tiny rural stores and independent businesses had their doors bolted tight, rolled down shutters locked up for the night, meaning hiding in one of the buildings wasn't an option. Panting, Alex leaned over and put his hands on his knees, trying desperately to catch his breath. Now what? Warren asked, the terror in his voice impossible to miss. That thing's gonna be here any second. We need to get away from here as fast as we can and then send word to the Foundation, Alex answered, speaking between deep, breathless wheezes. Tell them we need backup, that this thing is too dangerous for only 3 of us to take on. There may not be enough time for that, Jones chimed in, standing a few paces away from the others. He had been staring down the long stretch of the street they had stopped at, frozen to the spot, barely moving a muscle. Both Alex and Warren turned to look in the same direction, and there it was, only a few feet away under the light of a street lamp. It was almost like SCP-4910 was waiting for them to catch their breath, intelligent enough to know its hunt wasn't yet over. Alex, having now finally gotten a better look at the monster, instantly wished he hadn't. It made him feel sick, like there was a lump lodged in the back of his throat. The Grinner stood atop 4 pink, sinewy legs, its body just a formless mass of pure musculature that looked like it had been sculpted out of the same tissue that human gums are made from. It lacked a neck, instead having a pair of massive jaws poking out between its front shoulders, a dark, marble-like eye on either side of its head. SCP-4910's wide, almost crocodilian jaws parted, showing off what had earned it the ironic nickname of the Grinner. It presented a gaping maw of crooked, uneven teeth, with more clusters of enamel protruding from its back, elbows, and head. These teeth even formed the hooves it walked on. At this distance, it was hard to tell if the sickening yellow coloring of the teeth was purely because of the streetlights, or that they had been stained and covered in plaque. Alex tried to contain a cough in his throat, his stomach feeling like it was folding over itself at the sickening sight of SCP-4910. He started spluttering, wondering if he was about to vomit, given the lingering feeling at the back of his throat, like the sensation one gets when something is forcing its way up the esophagus, but it was lodged. The feeling wasn't coming up and out of Alex's throat, it was stuck there. By now he was wheezing, desperately trying to breathe through relentless coughs. Jones kept his eyes on the creature, who was pacing slowly towards them now, keeping a distance but moving like a lion encircling its prey. Warren turned and kneeled down to Alex, slapping him hard on the back, trying to help him cough up whatever he was practically choking on. Alex's eyes started going misty,
watering up as he gasped for air, still feeling that lingering feeling of being held right at the edge of being sick. In a final act of desperation, he jammed his fingers down his throat, trying to dislodge or dispel whatever was making him gag. That's when he felt it, a cluster of little solid pieces embedded in the roof of his mouth. Teeth that hadn't been there before, hadn't grown naturally, but had just sprung out of his flesh, and more were growing. Pain filled his mouth, spreading over Alex's entire face as new jagged teeth came bursting through his gum line, overlapping with his natural set, tearing his jaw into a wide, crooked grin. Looking up through his tear-filled eyes, he could see the same uneven smile on the face of the Grinner as SCP-4910 began dashing towards its next prey. There was blood in the water, but at least the screaming had stopped. It had been an ill-advised party boat floating out in dangerous waters, where a bachelor party full of rich and naive men had ignored every warning. Some had told them, "Don't you know that pirates operate in these waters?" Others had cautioned, "You might get confused for pirates and shot down by military boats." Nobody had expected the impossible monster that had actually killed all 10 people who'd gone out there on that warm ocean night. But in the chaos that unfolded the day after, they would find out. A cargo ship carrying hundreds of millions of dollars worth of products and valuable raw materials was scheduled to cross those same waters. If they could have gone any other way, they would have. But with corporate shipping deadlines to reach, they couldn't afford to take the scenic route and potentially add over an entire week to an already long trip. The cargo ship would need to take the risk. They would need to face the pirates on their own turf if it came to that. Meanwhile, on a number of secret compounds on land, the pirates were preparing. Their corrupt government shipping sources had given them a valuable tip about the coming ship, and they were doing everything they could in order to ensure this flagrant act of piracy would be successful. They loaded fuel into the tanks of their speedboats. They clicked magazines full of armor-piercing bullets into their AK-47s. They slipped on bulletproof body armor and clipped grenades to their belts. They were a terrifying force to be reckoned with, but they had no idea that within a few hours, they would be encountering something far more dangerous. You see, strange things had been happening on some of the world's coastlines. It started with surfers, foolhardy, sun-kissed thrill-seekers with an addiction to catching the biggest waves possible. Of course, there are plenty of surfers who get claimed by the sea every year. It is an occupational hazard, especially for fledgling surfers. But the mysterious circumstances of all the workers had something in common: blood in the water. Of course, it didn't stop with surfers. Anyone who swam a few feet further than the edge of the water seemed to be at risk. Lonely moonlight swimmers went first, but it didn't take long for whole families to start disappearing in the waves. A few here, a few there, nothing that most people even noticed, just a whole bunch of unconnected, isolated tragedies. The sea is a cruel mistress, though when looking at these cases, nobody ever considered that something else entirely could be behind all these terrifying disappearances. But back to the cargo ship, making its way across the turbulent waters. And those waters were indeed turbulent, far choppier than the forecast had predicted. The waves were huge, towering even, but that was no excuse to delay their important mission. Their comms had recently received a communique from the local government about the missing party boat, and all its occupants, assumed dead the previous night. Pirates, most likely. The cargo ship had come prepared for this eventuality. The companies sponsoring their efforts had lost too much time and money to let their ships be sitting ducks, floating goodie bags for violent criminals. That's why they'd spent a little extra money on a precaution: heavily armed mercenaries patrolling the ship, ready to kill in order to protect their boss's products. The scene is set for a bloodbath, and certain things out there in the deep love a good bloodbath. The pirates, ready to make a lot of money by any means necessary, loaded into their ships and speedboats, their assault rifles slung on their backs. They took to the waters, howling battle cries as they zeroed in on the cargo ship across the bucking waves. They prepared to fire, but they didn't expect their target to fire back. With no mercy, the mercenaries ran to the edge of the boat and started firing down on the smaller boats surrounding them with machine guns. Several pirates went down, chock full of bullets, dead before they could even figure out what was going on. As their bodies sank amidst the waves, their blood floated on the surface like big, red plumes. While the pirates were shocked at the resistance, they weren't unprepared. You don't get to become the rulers of this particularly tough part of the ocean without being ready to give it even harder than you can take it. In accordance with this, the pirates loaded up the handful of RPGs they brought out with them and fired their deadly payloads at the side of the cargo ship. Boom, boom, boom. The ship was rocked by explosions, knocking over some of the many mercenaries standing on the hull. Some fell, screaming down into the water, where pirates quickly cut them down with bursts of ruthless gunfire. But one mercenary who fell off the back of the boat got lucky, or unlucky depending on your perspective. No pirate spotted him, potentially leaving him safe and sound, until he noticed a large wave coming towards him. It took more than a little water to frighten this hardened soldier of fortune, until he saw something nightmarish hiding in the dark. The flash of white fangs and an ivory jaw. It hinged open and bore down on him as the wave prepared to crash. The mercenary screamed, and after the wave hit him, he was gone. Meanwhile, the violent battle between the mercenaries on the cargo ship and the pirates trying to claim it raged on. Using grappling hooks, the pirates were climbing up onto the hull, having disabled the back rudder with sustained gunfire and targeted bombing. The ship was soon suffused with bloodshed as pirates and mercenaries gunned each other down in bloody combat. Men were falling left and right, but there always seemed to be more. Little by little, as each man fell, there was more and more blood in the water. Out in the depths, as a storm began to rage and the waves whipped and roared, something hungry could smell and taste the blood. One boat full of pirates kept circling the cargo ship like a hungry shark. One worked the engine with practiced efficiency, while another 3 aimed AK-47s up at the ship, waiting for the moment when another unfortunate mercenary stuck up his head, ready to receive a bullet. But their true enemy wasn't even on the ship, it was sneaking up behind them. Only the man working the speedboat's engine spotted it before it was too late. A wave rose out of the sea, moving with a speed that shocked even this veteran seafarer. At first, he thought nothing of it, too busy to keep out of the range of mercenary bullets. He was hardly the type to worry about getting wet, and then he saw the teeth. As the wave rose well above his height and only a few feet away, he saw something impossible floating in the water. A shape he'd been seeing hanging above the fireplace in a bar he'd been frequenting for years. The jaws and teeth of a great white shark. Perhaps it was just refuse from a dead shark floating in the water. That was the most reasonable explanation, right? But if that was the case, why would the jaws be spreading further apart as though ready to receive him? He screamed so loud that his crewmates first assumed he'd taken a bullet, but when they turned around, they saw the truth. A huge wave was crashing down on them, and they saw the teeth. Not just one set, the one that the engine man had seen, but a different set of teeth for each of them. Hungry shark mouths without sharks bearing down. They all screamed, their desperate sounds of terror blending into an incoherent chorus before being cut off by the crash of the waves. The boat was wrecked, empty and bloodstained when the water dissipated, sinking lifelessly to the bottom of the ocean. But, of course, the worst was yet to come. The anomaly in the waves wasn't satiated. All the mercenaries and pirates it had taken so far were just the appetizer, and now it was ready for the main course. Everyone now on the cargo ship, pirate, mercenary, and sailor caught in between, who was fighting and even dying for money, had no idea what was coming. The wave rumbled and rose behind the ship, getting taller and taller and taller, until even the giant vessel looked like a toy boat in its wake. In the darkness of the wave, hundreds of pairs of gnashing shark jaws, the sharp edges of their teeth glistening. The wave fell upon the ship, sending flesh-eating water coursing through every nook and cranny. When the water cleared, there wasn't a single survivor. The ship, irreparably broken, sank to a metal graveyard down below. Nobody in the normal world would even know what happened. For those with a fear of sharks and deep water, this particular anomaly is a living nightmare, and one that the French division of the SCP Foundation has encountered with unsettling frequency. It's been recorded manifesting off a number of different coastlines, and who even knows how often it's manifested out in deeper waters. Despite its Euclid classification, containing this anomaly has been no mean feat. It's involved shutting down a number of coastlines completely on the pretense of animal research, the administration of Class A amnestics to witnesses and Class B amnestics to victims, as well as a complicated disinformation campaign to suppress photos and reports of the phenomenon online. But even with all of these containment procedures in place, many have still lost their lives to the jaws of SCP-054-FR, or the Great White Wave. By the Foundation's current estimations, recorded attacks by the Great White Wave have been fatal 68% of the time, with survivors often experiencing wounds consistent with those of an abnormally bad shark attack. In case our opening case study didn't clue you in, the Great White Wave is a set of ravenous shark jaws, most closely resembling the Carcharodon carcharias, or great white shark, manifesting inside ocean waves. Any waves over 4 meters tall can become a host to a Great White Wave event, with there theoretically being no upper limit to the size of a wave capable of causing this kind of anomalous catastrophe. The power of the Great White Wave's bite is also directly proportional to the size of the wave it manifests on too, meaning that in theory, a tsunami playing host to the Great White Wave could devour an entire town. While every attack that the Foundation has failed to prevent is, of course, a tragedy, the number of attacks has allowed the Foundation to uncover some extremely interesting data. For example, while attacks could happen anywhere at sea, they're most common in the 250-meter ocean radius around a coastline. When a human or non-aquatic animal is present in the attack zone, Great White Waves move at 3 times the speed of a normal wave in pursuit of its unfortunate prey. The Great White Wave isn't picky about its prey either. Divers, swimmers, and even aquatic vehicles like boats or jet skis have been devoured, though the waves seem to show a particular preference for surfers, which is gnarly in the typical sense, but not in the sense that surfers say it. The ghostly shark jaws will only become visible next to the part of the wave closest to the victim, meaning that they often aren't spotted until it's too late. But that doesn't mean it can't consume multiple victims at once. As you saw with the unfortunate sailors and pirates in our opening story, many sets of jaws can manifest in the case of having multiple victims to devour. The actual consumption occurs as the wave crashes down upon the victim, so the only recorded way to survive being on the wrong side of the Great White Wave is to dive into the water before the wave crashes. The French division of the Foundation conducted a series of experiments in hopes of understanding the dynamics of the Great White Wave, which had results both encouraging and disturbing. Based on non-anomalous sharks' ability to electromagnetically sense blood from extreme distances, the Foundation wanted to see if the same could be said for the Great White Wave. After pouring several liters of animal blood into the water of an affected area, they found that a Great White Wave regularly manifested within 2 minutes, crashing down and devouring the affected blood. However, an extension of this experiment found an alarming result. The same amount of human blood attracted a Great White Wave in under 60 seconds. Even a small amount of human blood attracted a Great White Wave significantly faster than a large amount of animal blood. Interestingly, non-anomalous great white sharks will rarely ever attack humans on purpose. Whenever they do, it's often because they mistook a swimming or surfing human for a seal, their natural prey. You'll often find that most shark attack victims are only bitten once, a common shark behavior known as a testing bite. Once the shark realizes that it isn't eating a seal, it will quickly move along. Yes, this probably won't make the person with a shark bite taken out of them feel any better, but the shark didn't truly want to eat them. Great white waves, by contrast, enjoy eating humans significantly more than animals. But that doesn't mean they won't eat all kinds of animals. Several maritime birds were eaten by a great white wave when they flew in front of the wave that was over 4 meters tall. We suppose the great white wave has never heard the salty old sea dog tale that it's bad luck to kill a seabird. The Foundation discovered a few useful things from their experiments. If you want to avoid getting eaten by the great white wave, you should avoid getting into the water if you're suffering from any kind of injury. Wounded people are 4 times as likely to be the victims of attacks, with the great white wave manifesting in less than 60 seconds. You can also improve your chances of surviving by following Sam Neill's advice from Jurassic Park. Don't move a muscle. Movement, especially panicked thrashing, has a tendency to lure this unique aquatic predator into your vicinity. But here comes the disappointing part. Other than staying in a landlocked area, there's basically nothing else you can do in order to stop a great white wave event. Weapons have proven completely ineffective, with the bullets of even the highest caliber weapons simply disappearing into the wall of water. Stealth, beyond avoiding movement, is also ineffective. No attempt to camouflage the smell of humans has been effective in helping them evade the detection of the Great White Wave. You can probably imagine how many unfortunate D-classes got devoured in the process of finding that one out. The Great White Wave is a disturbing reminder that perhaps we shouldn't worry about what lurks in the deep ocean, when nothing has a greater capacity to destroy us than the unimaginable power of the ocean itself.
This is impossible!
The SCP site director wasn't normally a calm or cheerful man, but the researcher had rarely seen him as angry as he was right now. His face turned a deep beet red as he scanned the documents on his desk before he asked how months of valuable research on this subject had suddenly gone blank. The data was completely gone. The researcher gulped nervously, hoping a demotion wasn't in his future, and nodded. How could this be possible? This was an experienced researcher who should have been taking all of the necessary precautions. Could the being they were studying somehow have erased all these documents himself? That's just what the researcher had been trying to find out for months, with hours and hours spent trying to learn the extent of its abilities.
Well, where are they?
The site director asked.
I want everything you have!
The researcher dropped a printout of their research on the mysterious subject's abilities on the director's desk. Every relevant line read, "Data lost." The director let out a deep sigh. He wanted to hear everything the researcher knew. Well, everything he could remember, at least, from the beginning. The researcher sat down and began to relay everything he could about SCP-343, which some of the other researchers had started to refer to by the nickname God. SCP-343 was first sighted in Prague, just an unassuming older man wandering the streets. He seemed completely normal to everyone who passed him by, until he decided he was tired of staying on the ground. An SCP agent stationed in the area noticed the old man disappear from the streets, as if he was blinking out of existence, only to appear on a rooftop nearby. The local SCP teams were marshaled, and they had soon tracked down what seemed to be a very powerful specimen. But SCP-343 didn't seem concerned. He reacted calmly when detained by the Foundation and went with them willingly. He was detained in a standard holding cell for interrogation and examination, but he seemed completely at ease with his sudden confinement. It would soon become clear that this ordinary old man was anything but. Drs. Beck and Nidlovu was brought in to consult on the SCP's classification, and that's when the first anomalies began. Their assessments matched initially, but when it came time to describe him physically, things took a strange turn. Older male, seemingly nondescript and with no unusual physical features. Caucasian in appearance. Dr. Nidlovu was confused by what Dr. Beck was describing in his report. This man was clearly black. The two doctors quarreled, unable to square their differing perceptions. They decided to bring in a third impartial view to settle it, their fellow researcher Dr. Wan. She didn't take long before coming back with her assessment. Older male, seemingly nondescript and with no unusual physical features, Asian in appearance, possibly Chinese. Whatever SCP-343 was, he seemed to be perceived by each staff member as close in appearance to their own race. But that was only the start of the anomalies surrounding the old man in the holding cell. Dr. Beck started making regular visits to the mysterious man, and in their first interview, he asked the old man who he was and how he came by his abilities. The old man had a simple response. "I created the universe." Dr. Beck stifled a laugh and decided to indulge the old man's delusion. It was a fascinating claim, but could he prove it? Without another word, SCP-343 got up from his chair, laughed, and turned around and walked through the solid wall in the holding cell and disappeared. Dr. Beck was about to hit the panic button and marshal the facility's security to find him when the strange man reappeared, walking through the solid wall. The only thing that was different? He was holding a hamburger, which he sat down and enjoyed. The facility quickly went on lockdown, and a full investigation was done into how SCP-343 breached containment. But there was no evidence of any security breach, no failures in containment, and no evidence of any other cells failing. SCP-343 hadn't broken through the security, he had just ignored it, as if it wasn't there at all. When questioned about how he had gone on his hamburger run, he simply repeated his belief that he was God, in between bites of his fast food treat. This would be far from the only time strange things happened around SCP-343. SCP containment cells are as secure as they need to be, but even the least strict containment isn't known for its decor, which is why Dr. Beck was in for a surprise the next time he paid visit to SCP-343. The bare-bones cell now looked like a comfortable home, decorated in Old English fashions. The scientists assumed that SCP-343 had been making many more trips out of his cell to get accessories to feel more at home. But that didn't explain all the changes to the cell. No one could explain how he had installed a roaring fireplace in the containment cell, and everyone who entered could swear the cell looked many times bigger than any other cell in the facility. SCP-343 wasn't just breaking containment. He now seemed to be breaking the laws of physics in the facility. The rules of the SCP containment facility didn't seem to be a concern to SCP-343, but there was one thing he didn't seem to want to do: escape. After every sudden exit, he would always return to his personal cell and treat it as his home. When interviewed by staff members, he was polite but vague, and everyone seemed to enjoy talking to him. It was decided to keep him on site, not attempt to increase his security, but restrict access and keep his room guarded at all times to ensure only researchers with level 3 access and above were allowed to meet with him. But God works in mysterious ways. Minimal Security Site-17 was one of the least restrictive SCP containment sites, hosting anomalies that could be safely contained and weren't likely to mount violent escapes. But as in every SCP facility, security was still taken seriously, and only those with proper clearance could interact with the subjects. So why did SCP-343 seem impossible to guard? While only level 3 clearance and above were allowed in, the guards assigned to protect the entrance all seemed to fall down on the job. Security Officer James, who was supposed to be keeping people out of SCP-343's cell, had instead let in multiple visitors, in addition to dropping in several times himself. When questioned on why he had gone against orders and done so, he simply replied that 343 seemed lonely and was so happy every time he got company that it just seemed like the right thing to do. The security guard was reassigned and new ones were brought in, but history repeated itself. Guards were given stricter instructions to minimize exposure, but SCP-343's presence always seemed to influence them anyway. His containment cell was a revolving door, with staff members at the facility entering regularly for friendly conversations. Dr. Beck decided it was time to take matters into his own hands. He would meet with SCP-343 one-on-one and express how dangerous these security breaches were. He would try to convince the mysterious being that he needed to stop influencing the minds of the guards watching him, or the facility would have to look into new measures to contain him. Dr. Beck entered the containment cell and had a long conversation with SCP-343, and when he emerged, he had a big smile on his face, like he had just finished a reunion with an old friend. He gave the current guard a friendly clap on the back and told him not to worry so much about security. After all, nothing bad was going to happen from letting people at the facility visit SCP-343, right? He wasn't dangerous in any way. He also said that security should bring him anything he requests so he would feel less need to leave his cell. Minimal Security Site-17 soon became a model SCP facility, with morale being the highest of any site, with most giving the credit to the presence of SCP-343. Employees generally make daily visits to his chamber, and he seems to have an encyclopedic knowledge of anything they want to talk about, including things he should have no way of knowing. Guards no longer quit their posts or break protocol, as their only real duty is to keep track of who meets with SCP-343, so they can be interviewed and debriefed after. Everyone's conversation is different, but they all report being in a better mood after leaving than when they came in. No further information is available on SCP-343's origins, the full extent of his powers, or whether he is telling the truth about being the god who created the universe. The site director rubbed his temples after hearing the researcher's explanation. So what you're telling me is that we have an uncontained, highly powerful SCP that has not only been breaking containment whenever it wants, but has managed to destroy all the files regarding the research on it. The researcher's answer was yes. However, the situation at Site-17 seemed to be stable, and they had come up with a plan that should help to maximize the positive effect SCP-343 has on the facility. They were even hypothesizing that staff from other sites and even certain anomalies could be pacified by 343's presence. The site director wasn't impressed though. He wanted the researcher to go back to the drawing board and redo the research. After all, if all the files were blank, how could they ever learn how to properly contain it? That's what the C in SCP stood for after all, containment. The researcher finally had to stand to the director though, and told them that it wasn't a good idea, that they had already tried everything to contain SCP-343, but that it wasn't that he broke containment. It was as if he didn't even acknowledge that an attempt had been made to contain him. He was omnipotent, aware of things he shouldn't, and able to do things that broke the laws of physics without breaking a sweat. There was no evidence that this was God, the creator of the universe as he claimed to be, but there also wasn't any evidence yet to conclusively prove he wasn't. The researcher's best guess was that this was a powerful reality bender whose abilities knew no limits, and that the only reason he was staying in the facility was because he wanted to, and doing anything to change that might cause him to change his benevolent ways. The director sighed. As much as he hated to admit it, his researcher was making good points. He wanted to meet SCP-343 personally, but did he need to know anything first?
Well, sir,
The researcher replied.
he likes hamburgers, but beyond that, he'll take care of the rest. He's right there where we left him,
In his home, waiting for his next guest. Nothing in life can prepare you for the raw heat of a house on fire. Throwing an arm up in front of his eyes and clasping a handkerchief to his mouth, Robert Chetford hacked up half of the contents of his lungs. Glancing at the material, he saw that his phlegm was black, poisoned by the smoke. A beam collapsed in front of him, sending a fresh wave of burning air into his face, so hot that it felt like it was going to scorch his ears off. He had to run. He had to get out of the house, but he knew he couldn't. His mother was upstairs. Robert barreled his way through the flames, shouldering open doors and stumbling along hallways. The air was so thick with smoke that he could barely breathe, so he collapsed to the floor and started to crawl on his stomach. He reached the first step of the grand staircase and started to heave himself up one at a time, feeling the heat of the house threatening to engulf him more with every inch he climbed. But he hadn't made it more than 5 steps before there was an enormous creaking sound, and the whole staircase collapsed beneath him. Sparks rushed up into the air and swirled around the room. Flames licked at the walls all around him. As Robert looked around at the collapsed staircase, he knew that it was hopeless. With tears streaming down his cheeks, he pushed himself forward and ran out of the house. The firemen swarmed past him, filling the building and shouting to one another, but Robert just stood there, staring up at the top floor window. On the other side of the glass, surrounded by billowing smoke, he looked up at his mother, sitting as she always did on her rocking chair, utterly motionless as the house burned around her. In an undisclosed facility in the United States of America, you will find what may well be the lowest security containment cell in the entire SCP Foundation. There is no heavily armored door, no bulletproof glass, no machine guns about to drop down from the ceiling at any point. In fact, there's very little in the way of containment at all. They often leave the door to the cell wide open. There is a window, but on the other side of it isn't a crowd of researchers, security guards, and agents ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. It's just a normal double-glazed window that looks out across a vista of fields, trees, and a couple of power lines. Facing the window is an old armchair in which the concrete man sits, SCP-014. He spends all of his day, every day, staring out of the window. This view specifically was chosen because very little changes in it. Night turns to day, the trees change with the seasons, and it rains occasionally. But there are no roads, no new buildings springing up, nothing to distinguish it from how it looked in 1937. Beside him is a small table, home to a record player. In the corner of the room, there's an antique set of shelves that house 3 dozen old records, all dated from the 1930s or earlier. All day, every day, the music plays out of the old speaker. Every so often, as researchers walk up and down the corridor, if they hear that there isn't any music playing, They'll come into the room and change the record over for a new one. The newest researchers check in with SCP-014 to see if he's okay. He rarely responds, and so before long, they stop asking. You would think, therefore, that the concrete man is elderly, approaching the twilight years of his life, but the man who sits there in his chair, staring out of the window and listening to music from almost 100 years ago, appears to be just 30 years old. Friends of Robert Chetford reported a noticeable change in his demeanor following the fire and death of his mother. He had lost his father not long before to a workplace accident. William Chetford had been a construction worker, climbing up the girders of New York's emerging skyline, pouring concrete and piling bricks. He had been working on a new building, one that was said to be the tallest in the world, called the Empire State Building. Day after day, he would climb the cranes, teeter precariously over the dizzying drops. Any slight mistake, and he would plummet hundreds of feet, often to the busy streets below. Sure enough, one day William Chetford's worst fears came to life. He was walking on a gangplank that wobbled and bent with every step he took. On his shoulders was a metal bar with a bucket of concrete dangled precariously from each tip. He walked this route every day, but clearly, that day proved too much for the wood to take. The board splintered and split beneath him, plunging him down and down through the scaffolding. William desperately reached out an arm and managed to grasp the edge of a girder. He hung there helplessly, staring up at his colleagues high above him. He cried out for help, and upon seeing him, they began to scramble down level by level to try and rescue him. He just needed to hang on for a moment longer, and they would rescue him. But one of them knocked over a bucket of concrete. William Chetford could do nothing but watch as the heavy sludge slowly tumbled towards his face. He tried to dodge it, but it was no use. The company told Mrs. Chetford that this had been William's saving grace, that he had been unconscious for the long fall down to the streets below. His fellow workers knew that this wasn't the case. They heard his screams all the way down. Mrs. Chetford didn't believe any of it. They were lying, all of them. The company, his co-workers, everybody. She knew what had really killed him. It was the same thing that was killing her slowly, the same thing that had been passed on to their son, concrete poisoning. She'd approached the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and any outlet she could, but none of them were remotely interested in the story. There were chemicals in the concrete. It wasn't safe to use. It never had been. She'd been working in nursing homes and seen the effects of concrete on construction workers. They'd become paralyzed, unable to move, spending so many years breathing concrete air, letting it absorb into their skin. Their bodies had slowly started to turn into it. She knew it. She started to go crazy, pinning up news clippings, medical journals, photographs, maps, anything she could find, all over her walls, her entire bedroom. She had red string hanging from the walls and ceiling, connecting to every surface. Robert watched helplessly from the doorway, unable to do anything as he saw his mother steadily entering into psychosis. But the further her paranoia went, the less energy she seemed to have for it. Weeks went by, and her manic fervor was replaced with lethargy. She got slower and slower in her movements, talked less and less at mealtimes, and began to sit down for extended chunks of the day. Robert, assuming that she was tired from grief, did what he could to help. He carried an armchair up to her room and placed it in the corner by the window so that she could look out over the world around her. He thought she was resting, but it soon became apparent that she wasn't really resting. She was withdrawing, almost freezing over. Desperate to try and get his mother to re-engage with the world, Robert sat down with her to try and understand all of her conspiracy theories around his father's death. She explained slowly and calmly that the concrete being used in New York was poisoned, cursed. She didn't know where it had been dug up from, how it had been mixed, or who was behind it, but she was getting close. Maybe it was the US government. Maybe it was the same witches. Maybe it was God himself. But she knew her husband, and she knew he wouldn't have fallen that day. He had walked across that plank thousands of times without incident. There was no way he would have made that mistake. Robert tried to connect the dots of what she was saying. Did she really think that it was the concrete that had killed his father? She said that it was, and that the same concrete is now killing her. She showed him her hands, turned them over front and back under the light for him to inspect. They looked just like normal hands, elderly, wrinkled, with deep veins popping out. but normal. She scratched at them and tried to feign pain for the effects of her fingers.
"Look," she said. "You see that powder coming off them? That's concrete powder."
But Robert didn't see any of it. The concrete man came to the Foundation's attention a couple decades ago. Construction workers in New York in the late 1990s were hard at work clearing out the foundations for a new skyscraper. The site was built on top of what used to be a residential block. But one intrepid builder soon discovered something that shook him to his core. There was an old cellar beneath where the building used to be. The lock on it was heavy, thick with rust, and had been open for close to 70 years. He and his team managed to pry it open, put on their flashlights, and went inside. What they found was a basement apartment still sitting there beneath the rubble. It was a relic of its time. Thick dust covered every surface, ugly wallpaper surrounded them, and ancient appliances covered with rust sat in the kitchen. It was almost like walking through a haunted house. The builders joked about ghosts stalking these corridors as they made their way through, until they reached the bedroom. Sliding the door open, they faced a man sitting there, staring at them from an old armchair. The four burly builders screamed like little girls for a split second, then burst out laughing when they realized that the man wasn't real. He must have been a waxwork or something. He was sitting so perfectly still and hadn't reacted at all to their presence. They went over to inspect what he was made out of. They tapped on his forehead, lifted his arms and dropped them, and were surprised at how convincing the fake man was. That was, of course, until he politely asked them not to touch him. This time, they really did scream like girls, running straight out of the basement into a local police station. This basement apartment was where Robert Chetford moved following the fire in his parents' home and the death of his paralyzed mother. Racked with guilt, he had never been quite able to process what had happened to cause his mother's mental state to deteriorate so rapidly. By the time she died, she had been looking at her hands and genuinely believed they were made of concrete. She would not move, she would not eat, she would not sleep. For days, she would just sit, staring out of her window. He knew he should have taken her to a doctor, but they just couldn't afford it. Maybe if he had, this would have all worked out differently. Robert would think about it hour after hour. He would sit down in the armchair in the corner of his room and ponder what had happened. It was difficult to keep track of time living in the basement. There were no windows, no daylight at all, but he didn't think he had been sitting there for very long when he noticed the skin on his hands starting to turn gray. Without panic, he slowly lifted his hands to his eyes and inspected what was happening. His fingers, down to about halfway through his palms, were dry and solid. He could move them just about, but it took a normal effort, and he could see cracks running along the back of the concrete when he did, so he decided not to. He wouldn't say he felt calm exactly, maybe disconnected. He didn't feel particularly hungry, he didn't feel particularly tired. In fact, he didn't feel much at all. His concrete limbs were only a passing curiosity to him as he sat in his chair. Very occasionally, he would get up to put on a record on his record player, then return to his seat and stare at the wall. That would be every couple of months at most. The rest of the time, he would just sit there. One day, he noticed in a vague corner of his mind that the ground was shaking and dust was filling the room. The ripping sound of dynamite and the heavy stone just above his head told him that the apartment block towering over him had fallen down and almost come through his ceiling. Robert just sat there, unconcerned. Another day, some indeterminate time later, a group of builders came in dressed in peculiar, futuristic clothing, with bright yellow hats and reflective vests. They seemed rather startled to see him, though in truth, he had little care for seeing them. What did perturb him was when a group of people claiming to be agents from the Foundation came into his room and carried him out. He didn't like the noise, didn't like the change. If he wanted to move, he would move. Not that he could, of course. He was now entirely made of concrete, but that was beside the point. These people put him in the back of a van and drove him across half of the United States. They wheeled him through brightly lit rooms and into a disgusting modern white box. They had done the courtesy of bringing his chair along and found a new record player for him, with a whole selection of albums lining a shelf on the wall. He would have appreciated it and said thank you to them, but he didn't really care. He wasn't present at all. This was, of course, due to the fact that he was made of concrete by this point. However, once he was sat in his chair and took in the sight in front of him, Robert Chetford felt a dull panic rising in his chest. They placed him at a window, just like he'd placed his dying mother in front of a window. He tried to clench his jaw, tried to move his hands, tried to cry out in fear and pain, but he couldn't. He was paralyzed. The smell of smoke filled his chest, choking him, torturing him as the memories of his burning household raged in his mind. He tried to scream, he tried to fight, he tried to do anything other than just sit there, but it was far too late for any of that. "Good afternoon, Mr. Chetford," the researcher said, busying herself and putting on another album for him to listen to. "Is there anything I can do for you, sir? Anything I can do to make you more comfortable?" The concrete man said nothing. The researcher patted him on the back of his hand. "Made of concrete indeed. Looks just like regular skin to me, Mr. Chetford. I do wonder what's going on inside that head of yours." On her way out of the room, she glanced at his view from the window. "Beautiful weather outside today, isn't it? Scorching even." "Are you afraid of haunted houses? What about haunted castles, or prisons, or mental asylums? We've all seen or heard tales of terrible tortured souls walking down long and lonely hallways, looking for people to pass their ancient pain onto. But what about something a lot more subtle? Perhaps as humble and unassuming as a cozy little woodshed. An adventurer named Kate would find that sometimes terrible things hide in simple places. With every step, twigs broke under the sole of her boot, their snaps echoing around the emptiness of the surrounding forest. Birds cawed down at her from their perches up above, a grave omen, a warning not to tread further. Well, at least to anyone who actually bought into all that superstitious stuff. Kat was far from a believer in that sort of thing, although at the same time, she had more than a passing interest in all things occult and unnatural. For her, it was less about the actual practice of certain things. The appeal was more about the stories that those practices inspired. Legends and myths, spooky tales of ghosts, or the dead rising from their graves, and of course, the magical mother of them all, witchcraft. Although her fascination with the inexplicable and macabre rarely, if ever, overlapped with her other big passion, hiking. Until, of course, today. She could trek anywhere and wanted to aim for everywhere, through sprawling national parks filled with vibrant greenery, up the sides of mountains, climbing up to the peaks, to across deserts, following the almost empty highways to get from one tiny rural town to the next. There was something about getting to not just know about the world, but to actively go and see it with her own two eyes, to actually be out there in it. That felt so right. On her current journey, Kate had taken herself on a long trail through the heart of the American Midwest, lugging a heavy pack over her shoulders, filled with her tent, sleeping bag, outdoor cooking supplies, and all manner of camping gear. She had set off following the winding path of the Patoka River, which ran around or adjacent to a few of the major cities in the state of Indiana. Kate was hoping to follow the flow of its main body of water all the way through to the city of Jasper. From there, it would be a straight shot over to the similarly named Patoka Lake, and after she had walked around the entire circumference of that, it would be a long hike east towards West Virginia, home of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Sure, it was one hell of an ambitious trip for one person traveling alone, but Kate liked to keep her journeys unencumbered. Having someone else coming with her would just slow her down, or they wouldn't be able to keep up with her at all. There's no fun at all in that. Stopping for the night, Kate lit herself a campfire. She had to make sure to keep it far enough from the trees to avoid starting any potential catastrophes, but also not too close to the wet bank of the Patoka, otherwise her kindling wouldn't catch alight. There were so many variables to consider for any aspiring camper. Sparks from the flint that she always took on her travels struck the dry twigs she had collected, and soon a gentle orange glow and wave of low heat were radiating from it. The fire provided Kate with just enough light to unfold and peg down her tent as the diminishing visibility of the dusk gave way to the encroaching nighttime darkness. Before getting comfortable in her sleeping bag, she put out her campfire using water from the Patoka, then zipped up the front of her tent, keeping a flimsy cloth barrier between herself and the local wildlife. Not everyone found it easy to sleep in the woods as Kate did. She couldn't remember a time when the noise of breaking twigs or the sounds of movement outside had ever kept her awake. Even now, the rustle of leaves and branches did little to disturb her, regardless of whether it was just the wind or something else moving through the bushes. Woken up by the sun rising, its warm light breaking through the trees, Kate readied herself to leave. She never stopped at the same place for more than one night, and rarely slept for any longer than she needed to. A nice 8-hour recharge of her energy reserves, and then it was back to the open road. After a quick breakfast, she packed up her single-person campsite, folded up her tent, and stuffed it back into her bag. Kate had been just about to leave when she noticed something was missing: her compass. It had been in her backpack, which she kept in the tent with her all night. Quickly scanning the ground around her, she couldn't see it. Weird, but she figured she had obviously dropped it at some point during her hike and would have to pick up a new one when she got to Jasper. It didn't matter. She could just follow the Patoka River as planned, although it didn't quite sit easy with her the rest of the day's trek. She'd packed the compass. That she was absolutely certain of. After all, she knew it wasn't like her to leave it behind. But then again, could she have forgotten it entirely? Over the next few hours, the question went round and round in Kate's head. As she walked along the bank of the river, silently starting to doubt herself, she drifted a little deeper into the woods, until out of the corner of her eye, she spotted something standing among the trees. It wasn't an animal or even a figure, but a structure. Spending so much time out in nature, anything man-made usually stuck out as an obvious, unignorable eyesore to Kate. She looked at it from a distance. It looked like an old house, isolated out in the woods, a short walk from the Patoka River. Checking the sky over her shoulder, Kate noticed it was getting late again, the daylight having gradually lowered while she had been wondering about why she had left her compass behind, or if it had been taken. Deciding to set up camp closer to the little house, she turned and headed in to inspect it closer. The place was far from the lap of modern luxury. Not that Kate couldn't live without running water or electricity for long stints of time, but it wasn't a house that had been built recently. Although she was no expert in either archaeology or architecture, Kate didn't think anyone had lived there for decades, possibly even centuries. It was almost medieval, a single room that was completely ramshackle, practically falling apart at the seams. Everywhere she looked, the wood that had originally been used to build it was either rotting away or had been broken into splintered remains. Plants from the forest had started growing through the floors and the walls, as if nature was trying to reclaim this spot of land where someone had once come to get away from the rest of the world. Sighing, Kat shook her head as she looked at the dilapidated house. There was no way even she could sleep there. It was too much of a safety risk. Parts of the ceiling could easily fall on her during the night if the wind picked up enough. Turning to leave, she stopped in her tracks as she noticed another structure, much smaller, behind the house. It had been so dwarfed in size by the slightly bigger building that it was completely obscured from view, but it looked to be in much better shape in terms of its structural integrity. It was a woodshed, its front door hanging lazily open. While not exactly brand new by anyone's standards, it was at least far more intact than the main house. Taking a few steps forward, Kate felt something like glass crunch under the heel of her boot. She scanned the floor, instinctively checking for any more so as to not injure herself. Even with the low amount of sunlight fading ever rapidly, it didn't look like more. Kicking her boot to loosen the shard, she made her way towards the woodshed, not noticing that what she'd been standing on had been a compass. Reaching the shed, she peered inside. It was pitch black within, almost as dark as the rest of the forest would be in a few minutes. Taking off her backpack and setting it down, she searched inside for her flashlight. Retrieving it and flipping on the switch, she looked back into the shed, and that was when she saw it. Taking a step back, Kat tripped over her bag, scrambling back up to her feet to make sure she had seen what she thought she had. It was just lying there, still and lifeless. For a split second, she hoped it was a trick of the light, just an old decaying lump of wood, but it wasn't. It was a body. The remains were charred, reduced to little more than bones some time ago. Even the ground next to it looked like it had been scorched, blackened by some intense fire damage. Kate's eyes were so transfixed on the burned mass of bones that a sudden sound startled her. Thunder growled above, immediately telling her she had little choice in what to do next. Her options were either she could sleep outdoors and get drenched by the rain and possibly catch hypothermia from being cold and wet, or she could spend a night in the cramped confines of this woodshed, which she would have to share with a long-dead body. Walking back outside to retrieve her bag, she pulled out a ground sheet and used it to cover up the bones. It was a mostly sleepless night, and those were a rarity for Kate. Any sleep she did get was light, easily interrupted by as little as her own movements, and offered her no actual rest. But for the next few hours, she just lay awake on the wooden floor. It wasn't the sounds of rain drumming against the shed's ceiling or the booming of thunderclaps that were keeping her awake. Thoughts of what she was going to do about the bones kept coming to the forefront of Kate's mind. Should she report it to the police when she got to Jasper? Was there even any point if she had no idea where on the map this abandoned place was? Frustrated, she tossed and turned, eventually sitting up as something made a sound. It was a low, creaking, rusty metal hinge, screeching for a lack of any oiling over the years. The door was open, swinging lazily in the decreasing winds, its lock having long since broken. Grumbling to herself, Kate reached for an old shovel that had been left in the shed and went to grab the open door. As her head poked out from the shed, she looked around. It was the middle of the night, nothing to be seen anywhere around. Yet, she couldn't escape the feeling she was being watched. Taking the shovel, she jammed it underneath the doorframe, keeping it closed. At last, there was quiet. Maybe now she'd be able to get some much-needed sleep, and she did. But that's when the nightmare started. The dream was bizarre, unlike anything Kate had ever experienced before. She instantly recognized the warm, flickering orange glow of a large fire before her. Naturally, she started to pace her way towards it, the fire's heat washing over her the closer she got. But as she approached, Kate noticed something moving amongst the flames. Arms flailed, trying desperately to extinguish the blaze, legs kicking and writhing, and that was on top of the screaming. Another figure was standing facing the bonfire, their back to Kate as she walked closer still. With every step, the sounds of insects buzzing could be heard getting louder and louder. But it wasn't until she stepped near enough that she saw where the noise was coming from. A swarm of bugs was darting through the air, hovering around the other figure. There were enough of the insects that they formed what looked like a cloak, every part of it moving and buzzing of its own accord. The whole nightmare was so vivid, Kate had no idea if it had been brought on by her exhaustion or that her mind was still fixated on the bones she'd found in the woodshed. Dehydration, lack of food, or even some other influence. It could have been any one of those factors that had caused her to dream a dream like this, or a combination of all of them. Nonetheless, she could feel the bugs tapping at her skin as she walked up to the other figure, still unable to see them clearly. The noise of insect wings whizzed past her ears louder than ever, loud enough to be real. Putting a hand on the figure's shoulder, Kate turned them around. It was a woman, or what was left of her. She had huge gaping wounds left by something that had been cruelly buried in her face. Yet somehow, she was still standing, dead but also alive at the same time. The swarm of bugs around her moved with her body as she turned and faced Kate, a pair of glassy eyes staring at her. They were both blank, completely empty, each one missing its pupil. Opening her mouth, the woman let out a piercing, blood-curdling shriek. All around her, the sound of the bugs got louder, almost deafening, and as she screamed, so did Kate. Panting and shuddering, she bolted upright, shock racking her entire body, heart thudding against her ribcage. Instantly, the exact moment she woke up, Kate realized that feeling was back. She had spent so much of her time hiking through the woods on her own that she could tell when someone was watching her. In the dark, she fumbled for her flashlight and clicked it on to reveal the door was still jammed shut. Apart from her, there was no one else inside the shed, no one alive at least. Looking over her shoulder, she could see the bones behind her and immediately backed away from them, as far as she could in that tiny wooden hut. She had covered them before going to bed, she was certain of it, hadn't she? All of a sudden, Kate felt her skin start to itch, an intense, irritating feeling. She had experienced the effects of poison ivy and all sorts of plants that caused similar reactions, but this was easily 1,000 times worse. Her skin felt like it was burning. She scraped her fingernails down her exposed arm, trying to suppress the itching even for a moment, but it did nothing. She scratched at the other arm over and over again in one spot until her flesh was pink and raw. Still no change. Kate raked her nails over her own body, this time leaving a deep scratch trailing over her arm. Under the light of her torch, she'd realized that she'd drawn blood. She looked back at the bones in the scorched corner of the shed. The skull was facing straight towards her, hollowed-out eye sockets staring as empty as the pupilless eyes of the woman in her nightmare. It had done this. It must have done, she thought. Reaching towards the door, dropping her flashlight, she wrenched the shovel out from where she used it to wedge the entrance closed. She stood up, kicking her sleeping bag and backpack to the side. As hard as she could, desperate to make the itching stop, Kate brought the shovel downwards. The head of it snapped the already weakened floorboards of the shed, exposing the soft, dry earth beneath. Maybe if she buried those charred remains, whatever was happening to her would stop. Frantically, she started digging, hurling shovelfuls of dirt through the shed door. It listed further open, creaking loudly on its rusted hinges again, causing Kate to turn, startled at the sound of it knocking against the outer wall of the shed. Someone was looking right at her. She could feel it as real and as persistent as the itching feeling that crawled over her skin like the tiny legs of an army of insects. She dug further, eventually throwing the shovel to one side and dragging her hands through the exposed earth below, desperately burrowing through and only stopping to use any rock she found to try and stop the itch. All she achieved was drawing more blood. Her fingers touched something soft but solid, and Kate brushed away to clear more of the excess dirt, trying to uncover whatever it was. It felt like a long mass just beneath the ground, with a second similar object parallel to it. But the further along with it she reached, the quicker she realized what it was. A leg. Clearing more of the dirt higher up, Kate could feel more. A stomach, ribs, shoulders, and a head. Reaching for her flashlight buried under some of the dirt that had been dug up, she pointed it at the thing she'd found. The woman, the same one from her nightmare. Something inside her chest moved, scratching sharply, causing Kate to cough. And once she started, she couldn't stop. It was like the itching she'd felt on the outside had now worked its way inside, and it was spreading. No, moving. In fact, not just moving, but crawling through her lungs, burrowing down into her stomach, and at the same time, upwards. The clawing of tiny legs digging their way up her windpipe, blocking it. Kate couldn't breathe. She dropped to her knees, retching as she struggled for air, sputtering as she felt something move at the back of her throat. That was when she heard the buzzing again. Locusts. A swarm of them came spilling out of Kate's mouth. She couldn't scream, let alone catch her breath. They filled the shed in seconds, engulfing her entire body, as more and more of the desert bugs still came pouring from her mouth. Outside, the wind kicked up again, with enough force to blow the door to the woodshed closed, trapping Kate inside with the bugs that tore at her. There was a single word on the wooden surface of the door, written in deep black charcoal. She'd missed it. The door had been open when she found the shed. The word was witch. The SCP Foundation would later find this cursed cabin and would naturally lose a number of D classes to a horrific form of locust-based suffocation. While there are clues as to what exactly is going on in this terrible place, from the malice of a long-dead sorceress to the lingering revenge of a woman wrongfully persecuted, definite answers as to the anomalous mechanisms of the shed known as SCP-4595 still elude even the Foundation's finest minds. It's a place so mysterious and dangerous that the special containment procedures read, "For safety purposes, no personnel are permitted to enter SCP-4595. SCP-4595 should only be entered by authorized testing personnel under the supervision of the SCP-4595 Research Lead. Under no circumstances is SCP-4595-A to be disturbed in any way." So perhaps we'll never truly know why a humble wooden shed in Jasper, Indiana causes such horrifying effects for its victims. The SCP Foundation thinks it's safer to just lock it away and forget about it, letting its ancient wood and old bones rot in the dark. But if you are really curious about the truth, you can always take a walk down the side of the Patoka River and pay the witch a visit. If you're lucky, you might even get to leave. Nobody should ever have to find out what a human body smells like, especially as it's being eaten. Sally clasped both hands over her face, trying desperately to block out the smell and to trap in her nervous breathing. She couldn't bring herself to look. Every bone in her body wanted to take off running through the forest, back out onto the interstate, to try and find some help. But there was nothing she could do. She could never outrun that thing. It was too fast, too savage. Even if she could convince someone on the highway to pull over and help her, they would just tell her she was going crazy. Maybe she was. Then the smell of her husband's body drifted over to her on the wind as the crunching sound of inhuman jaws filled the air. Panic set in. Then silence. She couldn't hear anything, not even a whisper in the trees. Had she done it? Had she survived? That's when a red sneaker stepped out from behind the tree, and Sally stared into the eyes of the blood-spattered hedgehog. Now, Sally had never been a gamer growing up. Sure, she played a little bit of Mario Kart and had a few Nintendogs back in the day, but the word gamer just wasn't for her. However, love conquers all, and when she found the man of her dreams, she decided that it would be worth at least giving some of his hobbies a go. They started off nice and easy, playing a bit of Stardew Valley, Minecraft, and maybe some Overcooked here and there. But before long, the pair of them were sitting down every day after work, headsets on and controllers in hand, ready to dive into the latest adventure. Just recently, the couple had gotten into retro games, going back and playing classics like Battletoads and Streets of Rage. The challenge was addictive, so when her husband John came home with a copy of an unmarked NES game, Sally was intrigued, to say the least. John explained that he had found it listed on eBay under a very suspicious account. He had gone to pick up the game after work that day, expecting to be greeted by the smiling face of the seller. Instead, he found a blank gray cartridge and a very brief manual wrapped together with an elastic band on a street corner. The seller had listed it for virtually nothing, and based on the description, seemed very eager to get rid of the game for some reason. So eager that he must not have wanted to stick around to even hand it over. Sally, already bored with this backstory, snatched the manual up and read the title of the game, Professor Gould's Terrifying Horror Challenge. There was no artwork, no branding, no publisher, no stickers, nothing to differentiate this game from being just a blank cartridge. As far as Sally knew, it could have been a virus, some kind of malware game designed to brick their NES. But the words horror and challenge from the title sold her. She blew on the pins in the cartridge and slotted it into place in the NES. A black screen appeared with nothing on it but two options, single player or two player. Sally uncoiled a second controller and handed it to John with a grin. "You ready?" Sally hit two player, and a new screen came up. "Are the people holding the controllers the people who want to play the game? Yes or no?" Sally hit yes. A shrill beep filled the room, high-pitched and grating on their ears. John immediately grabbed for the remote and turned the volume down on the TV, but the beep just kept going. The screen was a bright red, filling the room with an unnatural bloody light. John tried to hit the off button on the remote, but the TV stayed red, and the beeping sound continued, filling their tiny apartment. Getting up and rushing over to the TV, John tried to unplug it, but it was no use. The beeping noise and the red screen persisted. He looked back at his wife in confusion, but she was looking somewhere else entirely. There was a rat in the corner of the room with mottled fur, bloated flesh, and cracked teeth. It stared right into Sally's eyes, salivating. Without a moment's hesitation, she leaped up onto the couch and screamed. But instead of running away, the rat slowly crept forward, looking almost as if it was smiling. Then a second one appeared, crawling out from behind the couch, followed by a third in the doorway, and a fourth beneath the TV. Dozens of rats filled the room, swarming in from all directions, climbing over one another in a desperate attempt to get into the tiny apartment, to get to Sally and John. Sally clambered onto the couch with her laptop and tried to kick away any of the rats clambering up onto the furniture, but it was no use. For every rat she kicked away, another one appeared, until soon they were climbing their way up John's jeans, their sharp little claws digging into his flesh. The rats tore at Sally's clothes, climbing over one another desperately, heading towards her mouth, trying to burrow their way in. Hairy bodies filled her vision, and the stench of disease made her gag. Seizing an opportunity, a rat tried to clamber through her open jaws. She felt its tiny paws scrabbling at her tongue. With tears filling her eyes, she took one fleeting look at the man she loved and noticed something behind him. A giant yellow bottle with the words "rat poison" stamped into the side was sitting precariously on top of their cabinet.
Half stumbling, half swimming, Sally pushed her way through the throng of rats filling their apartment and desperately grabbed the bottle from on top of the cabinet. Throwing the rats off her hands, she managed to unscrew the lid, held the bottle high over her head, and poured the thick, stinking liquid all over the swarm of rats threatening to engulf her. The chorus of death filled the room. Whether it was the sound of the rats dying or their bodies being evaporated by the poison, she couldn't tell. All she could do was push through to try and find her husband and save him too. And miraculously, within just a few seconds, all of the rats had disappeared. The room was empty, the same as it had always been. Even the big yellow bottle was gone from her hand. All she could do was stare at John as he stared back at her, as the words, "Level 1, complete," appeared above their heads. Welcome to SCP-1315, the most visceral, most real, and most dangerous horror game you will ever have the misfortune of playing. It's not too late to back out at the menu screen when you select how many players you want. It's not even too late at the confirmation screen, but once you're in the game, there's no turning back. Either you beat the game, or you die trying. Beating this game is no easy feat. A copy of SCP-1315 has been in Foundation containment since 1986, but in all of that time, only one D-Class personnel has managed to make it to level 33. It is not known how many levels there are, but there is theoretically a final boss. The reason why no one has been able to beat it thus far is that with each level, the difficulty of the game increases. Relatively minor challenges in the first few levels give way to extremely difficult, life-threatening scenarios as the player progresses. These levels broadly follow the same pattern each time, but individual levels often contain an element of randomness. For example, level 1 that Sally and John played contained rats, but other tests have shown subjects being swarmed by insects and spiders, often coinciding with established phobias that the subject has reported prior to the experiment. 2 hours later, John and Sally were running low on ammo. With both couches pushed against the door to the lounge, they both hunkered down behind the TV, loading the remains of their shells into the shotguns. From out in the hallway, they could hear the heavy footsteps of more animals rushing towards them. When the pounding on their door had first started, they assumed it had been their neighbor coming up to complain about their screaming and running around in the previous levels. John had been so deep in thought trying to work out what their cover story could be, that when he opened the door and saw an adult grizzly bear standing on its hind legs in front of him, it had taken him almost too long to react. Sprinting back into the lounge, he found his wife already loading rounds into the shotgun that had suddenly appeared on the floor in front of her. With a grim expression on her face, she seemed to have accepted their new reality, that this was a game they were going to have to fight their way through. But with every bear they shot as it tried to push its way into their lounge, 2 more had appeared just minutes later. While they had been conservative with their ammo, aiming for the heads and not taking any risks, the pair was starting to run dangerously low. Was there an objective they were missing? Were they supposed to have done something to progress through the level? Sally mashed a couple buttons on the NES controller, and then some text appeared on the red screen. Objective: survive. 4 bears appeared in the doorway and pushed hard against the couch. It slid out of the way and they charged into the room. Sally and John desperately took down the first 2 of them, but the dreaded click of the triggers told them they had nothing left. Closing their eyes and bracing themselves for the worst, the pounding of heavy paws on their vinyl floor suddenly stopped. The bears had disappeared. Level 3, complete. Well, whatever's next can't be worse than that, surely. But it was. They managed to hold out in their apartment until level 9. But then the windows behind their heads smashed into 1,000 shards as a black-booted SWAT team swung into the room. With barely any time to react, Sally and John pushed their way out of the apartment and braced themselves down to their car. Slamming both doors closed, they took off racing towards the highway as the SWAT vehicles pursued them. 3 hours later, the couple was running low on gas. Swerving their way along the interstate, their eyes on the mirrors constantly, the pair was pretty certain they'd managed to lose their assailants. Slowing their car to the speed limit, they gently weaved their way through the traffic towards the nearest gas station. Trying their best not to look suspicious, the 2 of them went inside. keen to stock up on supplies. Who knew how long this game would go on for? They had already been active for hours and were exhausted. With the SWAT team hopefully long behind them now, the adrenaline rush was starting to wear off, and the reality of this situation was starting to set in. Hopefully, there were just 10 levels and they only had one to go. With the sinking feeling in their chests, each one of them realized it was more than likely to be 100. Definitely time to stock up on some supplies. They were barely halfway around the gas station when the words, "Level 9, complete," flashed in the sky above them. Both John and Sally froze where they were and stared at each other over the aisles. A blue flash darted past them outside the windows, then again going the other way. Sally ran over to the counter and banged on the glass.
Lock the door! Lock the door!
But the teenager just looked at her in confusion. And now it was Sally's turn to look around and see her husband staring in horror. On the other side of the glass, standing between two gas pumps, was Sonic.EXE. With haunting red eyes, rows and rows of sharp teeth, and blood dripping from his mouth, the hedgehog stared intently. Sally pointed out the window and turned to the teenager, yelling, but the girl took a step back, looking scared of her. The girl couldn't see it. She couldn't see Sonic. For all these challenges, all the things they'd been fighting, was it just in her head? But there was no time to worry about that. Sally ran towards the door to the back of the shop. Hearing the footsteps of her husband running after her, she kicked open the fire exit but froze immediately. Sonic.EXE was standing there in front of her, smiling. It was toying with them. They needed to run to get out of here as quickly as possible, but how could they outrun Sonic? "Hey, Sonic!" John yelled from behind her. "You hungry?" He pushed Sally out of the way and threw a handful of chili dogs out into the forest. Hearing "hungry," Sonic spun around and chased after his favorite food as quickly as possible. That had only bought them a few moments of time, but maybe that was all that they would get. Sally and John ran back through the convenience store and out the front. They couldn't run, but they could at least try to hide. A semi-truck had a slam on the brakes as the pair of them ran across the interstate. Without a choice of running anywhere else, all they could do was dart into the woods on the other side and hope that Sonic had a bad sense of smell. But as they ran through the woods, they could hear an ominous voice echoing behind them.
Gotta go fast. Gotta go faster than that.
Sally found a tree and dived into cover just at the right moment. Her husband wasn't so lucky. There was a flash of blue and a horrible crunching sound before his body hit the ground. Sonic.EXE was on top of him in a heartbeat, rows of sharp teeth gnashing. Sally clasped both hands over her face, trying desperately to block out the smell and trap her nervous breathing. She couldn't bring herself to look. Every bone in her body wanted to take off running through the forest, out onto the road to try and find some help. But there was nothing she could do. She could never outrun that thing. It was too fast, too savage. Even if she could convince someone on the highway to pull over and help her, they would just tell her she was going crazy. Maybe she was. Then the smell of her husband's body drifted over to her on the wind as the crunching sound of inhuman jaws filled her ears. New tears flowed. Then, silence. She couldn't hear anything, not even a whisper in the trees. Had she done it? Had she survived? Then a red sneaker stepped out from behind the tree, and Sally stared into the eyes of the blood-splattered, deranged hedgehog. Sally blinked, and it was gone. Level 10, complete. The open forest stretched out in front of her. Without a moment to catch her breath, Sally took off running into the country on her own. Whatever was coming next, she had to be ready for it.
Ranger Halter felt the bark of the tree trunk slamming into his back, practically knocking all the air out of his lungs as he tried desperately to slow his frantic breathing. The sound of his own panting filled him with a sudden, horrifying thought. If he could hear his own ragged breaths, then it could hear them too. He clamped a hand over his mouth, clenching his jaw shut so tightly that he thought his teeth might splinter as he pushed them together. His free hand gripped the tranquilizer gun, shuddering as the snap of a twig rang out somewhere behind him. It had caught up to him already. He could bolt, make a quick dash for a cover behind another tree, but it was close enough now that it would see him. And if it did, it would come rushing after him with a speed that even a seasoned park ranger couldn't match. As much as he tried to force himself to stay still, The petrified curiosity got the better of him. Holter peeked out from behind the tree and immediately wished he hadn't. It had all started out as what sounded like an everyday occurrence. High atop his watchtower in the Glacier National Park, Ranger Holter had been enjoying the view of Montana's Rocky Mountains, a cup of coffee from his thermos in his hand. Then the familiar squawk of his radio had cut short his appreciation of the serene scenery. Holter sighed, tossing the remaining contents of the cup over the tower's railing, wondering what kind of day he was in for as he went to answer the radio. Most of the time, things in Glacier Park were as peaceful as they looked, but the park ranger knew that staying vigilant could make all the difference when it came to finding a missing hiker in time, or the difference between deterring a group of campers away from a family of bears and having a hell of a mess to clean up. He pushed down on the button for the microphone, connected to the bulky radio that took up practically an entire desk.
Holter, thank God, came the relieved voice from the other side. We've been trying to reach everyone, put them on alert. We've got trouble. Reports of a coyote gone feral attacking folks. I'm on it, Holter replied, grabbing his gear from the cramped watchtower as he continued to speak into the mic. Where did the report come in from? Not far from your station. I'd say about a click west from your position.
Stowing his tranquilizer gun, Ranger Holder descended the ladder from his watchtower down to ground level. As a park ranger, Holder valued the environment he worked in. And as a fan of the SCP universe, we know how much you value intricate world building, or in some cases, world destroying. But either way, we couldn't be happier to introduce you to the sponsor of today's video, World Anvil. World Anvil is a comprehensive set of world building tools that not only help you craft and organize your unique setting, but also present it in a captivating manner. From wiki-like articles and interactive maps to a full-fledged RPG campaign manager and novel writing software, World Anvil has everything a world creator could dream of. World Anvil equips you with over 25 templates, prompting you to dive deeper into your creations. Enrich your content by embedding maps, images, sound effects, and even little secrets for that immersive touch. With their innovative design, you can easily visualize your world through maps, chronicle its history with timelines, and fine-tune events with intricate details. Your crafted world can be beautifully showcased on a unique homepage, inviting others to dive into your vision. Got a sudden idea while working on another? No problem. World Anvil lets you swiftly create new articles or link existing ones, ensuring you never lose track of your inspiration. But my personal favorite feature is their interactive maps. Beyond just creating and uploading your own designs, you can directly link your creations, allowing for a dynamic and engaging experience. And if you're collaborating, invite your team to refine, write, and even let your fans chip in. I'm currently working on my own interactive map of Site-17, and maybe I'll even let you see it when I'm done. But don't wait for me. Dive into World Anvil yourself and elevate your world-building game. And here's a treat. Use our link in the description to go to worldanvil.com and use the code SCP to grab a whopping 51% off any yearly subscription. Explore, create, and share with World Anvil. The sun was already starting to dip out of sight behind the trees. Pretty soon it'd be pitch black, save for the beam of his flashlight. He had to move fast. Coyotes were only known to attack humans on rare occasions. Usually they kept away, at least enough to make them a minimal risk. But waiting for him just west of the watchtower wasn't a coyote, at least not at first. Watching it from behind the tree moments later, Ranger Holter's stomach turned at the sight of the creature. It walked bipedally, like a human, but the shape was all wrong. Its legs looked broken, but that hadn't stopped it from catching up. Instead of bending at the knee, they were Z-shaped, pointing back behind the creature, then twisting back again in the opposite direction at the joint. They looked more like the legs of a dog, but they were far too big. The same could be said of the arms, bent out of shape at multiple points like its legs were. The creature was a mess of misshapen limbs. The cartilage in its ears had seemingly reformed into points, and there were claws protruding from its fingertips, practically bursting out from where a human's fingernails would be. But beneath it all, and what alarmed Ranger Holter the most, was its skin. It had darkened in patches, layers of fur sprouting over those areas, but there were still parts that remained clear, where skin, human skin, was still visible, peeling away to reveal the new fur-coated layer underneath. It looked like a grotesque accident, like something ripped straight out of an old horror movie, the kind of monster that a mad scientist would make by haphazardly splicing DNA and playing God. Holter checked the tranquilizer gun in his trembling fingers, still empty after that most recent shot. He reached for another dart, slowly sliding it into the loading mechanism and readying the pistol. It cocked and made a sound. The creature's malformed head turned, snapping directly towards the source of the noise, directly towards Holter. He turned to sprint away, trying to expand the distance between him and it. If he was too close, the dart wouldn't have enough momentum when he pulled the trigger. The toe of his boot snagged on something solid, unmoving, a root from the tree he'd been hiding behind. He felt himself tumble, landing with a hard thud against the forest floor. His gun, it had fallen from his grasp. He scrabbled around in the dirt for it, barely able to see where the tranquilizer had landed in the dark. Just as his fingertips brushed past something metal, Holter felt the force of something heavy strike his back again. This time, though, it wasn't a tree. It was the creature. It snarled, gnashing its candid jaws that were protruding out of its skull, rows of sharp teeth that had uprooted the old ones, burying themselves into the park ranger's neck and not letting go, until he'd stopped moving for good. A few short hours later, a convoy of mysterious, unmarked vehicles arrived at Glacier National Park. The rest of the park rangers who had reported the strange activity were approached by shadowy figures who refused to give their names or offer up any form of identification other than just referring to themselves as experts in things like this. Not long after, none of the others would remember Ranger Holter or the incident that had led to his untimely death. After administering amnestics, it didn't take the SCP Foundation search party long to discover a lone coyote sniffing around the remains of a park ranger covered in blood. The wild animal was captured, to be brought back for testing before being re-released into the wild. Meanwhile, the Foundation scoured the rest of the area until they came across the real culprit. Standing in a clearing a short distance from a footpath through the forest was SCP-1579. Of course, the next challenge was getting it packed up and transported to Biosite 66 without touching it. To the untrained eye, SCP-1579 looks to be fairly unassuming, even as far as anomalous objects go. It is simply an old wooden sculpture, the kind that can even be occasionally found in various wooded areas throughout the world. Its age is apparent from even one cursory glance at SCP-1579. The partial damage to its cedar surface speaking to the numerous years it has existed for, along with the bright green moss that covers it. Although, curiously, this moss doesn't seem to dry out and die in responses to changes in humidity, nor does it affect SCP-1579's structural integrity. As for where it came from and who made it, those are still unknown, as if the answer to what holds SCP-1579's anomalous properties, whether or not the cedar it was carved from or the moss coating the sculpture possesses some unknown properties, or if SCP-1579 was somehow imbued with these after being created. Initial testing by the SCP Foundation's researchers determined SCP-1579 to have an abnormally high resistance to the type of damage wood, and particularly cedar wood, is susceptible to. For one, it does not seem to show any signs of rotting or natural degradation. For another, it is also resistant to heat, at least to a certain extent. It doesn't burn the same way other objects constructed from cedar wood. However, this sculpture is not entirely indestructible. Pieces can be easily chipped off of the main body of SCP-1579, and these splintered fragments continue to carry the same anomalous effects as the rest of the sculpture, even when separate from it. But of course, you want to know about the creature. How does this supposedly harmless, if a little structurally abnormal cedar wood sculpture connects to whatever it was that killed Park Ranger Holter? Well, it's quite simple actually. SCP-1579 killed Holter. Not directly, you understand, but by proxy, through its further anomalous properties. Still confused? Well then, how about a demonstration? Let's take a look at one of the Foundation's preferred test subjects, an expendable member of D-Class personnel, probably spending multiple life sentences working here at the SCP Foundation, rather than behind the bars of a maximum security institution. Now, what would happen if you place this delightful individual in the same room as SCP-1579? Well, nothing initially. That is, until the subject touches the cedar wood surface of the sculpture, either out of curiosity or following the instructions of a Foundation researcher. That's when the real anomaly starts. The wooden sculpture will exhibit a slight but observable movement, shuddering slightly as if moved by an unseen force. This will precede the person who touched the object feeling a burning sensation, that kind of irritating, painful heat that spreads underneath the surface of the skin. The burning will always begin at the area of their body that made direct contact with SCP-1579, and touching it again at any point will trigger a reactivation of the sculpture's anomalous effects. Subjects experiencing the effects of SCP-1579 have described the feeling as being akin to a bad sunburn that rapidly spreads across the skin from the point of contact, only to stop once it has affected a person's entire body. Following the subsidence of the burning sensation, subjects experiencing the side effects of touching SCP-1579 will notice an immediate change to their skin. Within a window of 3 minutes, their skin becomes thin and paper-like in its texture, before starting to peel away. Once this stage occurs, the peeling skin will reveal a new layer underneath, hence the colloquially used codename for this anomaly, different skin. However, this so-called different skin isn't merely a new layer of otherwise ordinary human skin. Instead, it will belong to another species entirely. A person coming into contact with SCP-1579 will find themselves rapidly developing new skin that shares the physical traits, as well as matching DNA, to that of a number of animal species. It should be noted that these features will continue to rapidly develop until the subject is entirely transformed and is no longer considered to qualify as a human being. As for the specific transformation that occurs, there are a number of known outcomes that repeat in the following cycle. Let's say our D-class, we'll call them Subject A, touched SCP-1579 at the start of the cycle. They would, after the burning sensation stops and peeling begins, start to sprout dark feathers across their torso, arms, and upper legs, likely with a great deal of pain as the sharp quill of these feathers start to burst out from beneath the skin. Beneath the knees, Subject A will see their legs start to become yellow and scaly, as well as a change that causes their toenails to simply start to painfully protrude outwards until they form pointed, blackened talons. Subject A's face will also start to grow feathers. However, these grow outwards away from the areas of the nose and mouth. Flight feathers will also protrude from the forearms, multiplying in number until their entire body is covered, at which point Subject A, on every level including genetically, more closely resembles a Corvus corax, more commonly known as the common raven, than a human being anymore. Take another test subject, Subject B, and get them to touch SCP-1579 right after. Their different skin is covered in brown fur that's approximately 4 inches long. Their lips and skin underneath the fur will darken, and their nose will become constantly moist. Claws will start to grow from their fingertips, although these will be notably smaller than those of a fully grown creature of the same species, an Ursus arctos horribilis, or a grizzly bear. Then we get to the point in the cycle where some unwitting hiker encountered SCP-1579 in the forests of Glacier National Park, Montana. When this subject, Subject C, touched the cedar sculpture, their skin began to grow layered fur, as the cartilage of their ears is separated from their tissue and replaced by new, reshaped cartilage. Much like Subject B, who SCP-1579 turned into a grizzly bear, Subject C also had darkened skin, a moistened nose, and longer, sharper nails. It was at some point during this transformation that an unassuming park ranger stumbled upon Subject C. Frightened by what he saw, this ranger was unable to identify that what he interpreted as attacks by some kind of half-human, half-animal hybrid were actually desperate pleas for help, as Subject C was transformed into a coyote. Although it's hard to say which physiological change triggered by SCP-1579 is the most alarming or unpleasant to experience, the fourth kind is in no way any more pleasant than the preceding 3 in the cycle. Subject D of this particular series of tests will find the new layer of skin that emerges under the old to be hairless and of a green coloration, often with brown markings. Unlike the previous instances, their skin will rapidly begin to dry out and seems to be far more reactive to the humidity of the surrounding environment. It is also far thinner than that of the skin possessed by other transformations that SCP-1579 causes. So thin, in fact, that the eyeballs of Subject D will be visible through its eyelids, which rapidly become translucent, similar to those of the Suracris regula, otherwise known as the Pacific tree frog. Repeated activation of SCP-1579's anomalous properties will trigger the next transformation in the cycle, whether the cedarwood sculpture is touched by a new subject, or repeatedly by the same person. In the latter instance, where a subject is re-exposed to SCP-1579, the additional changes their body undergoes will be significantly more painful. Their already newly replaced outer layer of skin will fail to dry out and will begin bleeding instead. 3 or 4 consecutive exposures to SCP-1579 will lead to excessive bodily trauma for the subject, usually causing them to die from shock before the 4th transformation is complete. And as we're sure you can imagine, an amalgamation of a human, a raven, a grizzly bear, a coyote, and a tree frog is hardly a pleasant sight. This unfortunate fate was suffered during one of the first incidents with SCP-1579 that brought the Foundation's attention to it. During an elementary school field trip, a teacher who was explaining the history of totem poles in Native American culture accidentally touched SCP-1579. While experiencing the pain of her transformation, she fell against the sculpture in a panic, not realizing it had been what caused her to change. This repeated triggering of the object's anomalous effects led to her untimely death, an event that had to be wiped from the minds of her students by the Foundation using the careful application of Class B amnestics. For now, SCP-1579 is kept in a secure, sterile environment at a Foundation storage warehouse, where personnel are not permitted to make any contact with it. So there's no need to worry about accidentally running into SCP-1579 in the wild. Although, there are always plenty of other things to worry about while out on a hike through the forest. Things that could be right behind you.
The shinobi crouched low on the pagoda roof and listened to the night air. Up here in the mountains, away from the hustle and bustle of the markets in town, it was almost silent. Just the distant rattle of shutters somewhere behind him. The mountain shrine was tucked out of sight, so far into the countryside that no one would stumble onto it by accident. No one would come here without a reason. The shinobi knew the face of his target, a warlord turned politician with more blood on his hands than the assassin sent to kill him. By the burning glow of the night sky, the shinobi could see the man kneeling at the shrine. The path was made up of small stones, so he'd have to drop onto the grass and creep around the pond to approach his target. No guards, no one else was there at all. This was the spot where the man came to pray when he was struggling to sleep, perhaps trying to atone for the lives he'd taken. Perhaps he didn't care at all. The ninja drew the blade in total silence and timed his drop to the ground with a rattling noise in the distance. With each dainty step, he closed the distance to his target, readying the blade over his head. It was done in a moment. The man was dead before his body hit the ground. He likely didn't even notice as the steel had severed the nerves running down his spinal cord. So sharp was the blade that had slid through his bones like a fish through water. Raising the blade to his eyes, the shinobi cleaned it quickly. If he was seen with blood on his sword, he would immediately be implicated. Not that he was ever seen, but precautions like this were what kept him out of sight for all these years. When you lived in the Valley of Ashes, the burial grounds for countless wars, you had to become a shadow, become one of the ancient spirits haunting the woods. But as he wiped the red from the steel, he caught a flash of light in the reflection, an orange glow marking a jagged line across the metal. That's strange. Sunset was several hours ago. Come to think of it, why was there an orange glow in the sky? He snapped his neck around to see the fires through the gates into the pagoda's garden. Down by the ocean's edge at the foot of the mountains was the city where he had always lived, and it was on fire. Leaping up onto the walls, he stood up straight, surveying the horror scene taking place before him. Thick plumes of smoke billowed up into the night sky, so dense and large that it seemed to become the blackness of the night. It was hard to make out much of what was going on down there. The shinobi looked everywhere to try to see the invading army or the rioters, but there were none. Just people running in all directions, like ants out of a flooding nest. But there, moving in amongst the smoke, were other shapes, impossibly tall, lumbering around like people. People that towered over the houses, that had to crane down to the ground to scoop up the poor civilians who were running this way and that. The shinobi stood there terrified, as he realized that the rattling sound he'd been hearing all night wasn't from any shutters at all. He could do nothing but watch as the trees in front of him trembled and buckled in all directions as a hulking, shadowy figure lumbered towards him. The Imperial Japanese Anomalous Matters Examination Agency, or the IJAMEA, was a Japanese agency responsible for tracking a number of mysterious and often dangerous artifacts, creatures, and anomalies prior to the Second World War. In 1945, the IJAMEA was shut down and absorbed into the SCP Foundation. All of these data, historic records, and anomalies were all transferred over into the Foundation's control. Reasons for this were partially political and partially in the interest of world peace. The formation of the IJMEA was influenced heavily by Japan's ties with Germany in the first half of the 20th century. The Imperial German Anomalous Matters Examination Agency was the blueprint for their Japanese equivalent. However, with increasing militarism in Japan throughout the 20th century, the IJMEA became increasingly obsessed with trying to harness their anomalous discoveries in the interests of military power. Their goal became the establishment of a yokai battalion, powerful enough to establish them as one of, if not the world's greatest superpower. Following the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan surrendered in the Second World War and agreed to dissolve its military, including the IJAMEA. That left the Foundation with the task of picking up the threads left behind and trying to come up with new ways of securing, containing, and protecting some of Japan's most deadly SCPs. Few more deadly and evasive than the entities that were too much, even for the Yokai Battalion. SCP-2863. In 1946, cleanup operations were in full effect, trying to deal with the fallout from the atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki. Crews dressed in lead-lined suits worked around the clock, burying radioactive material and trying to remove as much contaminated debris as possible. Rebuilding the city was still a long way off. At various points, the wind would kick up and carry the dust left behind into the air, creating a dangerous radioactive haze. Crews continued to work through such conditions as the understanding of airborne contamination was still in its infancy. Watanabe Goro was one such worker. Midway through a night shift and clasping a damp rag to his mouth, he pushed on through the dust, clearing out building after building. They had spent the morning carrying corpses out of an unidentifiable building. The corpses themselves were pretty much worn away too, just skeletons really, charred by the blast from months before. As Goro staggered along the street, he kept feeling like he was imagining things. The long hours and traumatic conditions were enough to make him see all kinds of things in his dreams, but he kept feeling like his dreams were starting to creep into the real world. Shadows kept moving through the haze all around him, taller than buildings, staggering around as if they were drunk. They had been appearing all night, just out of sight, but always close by. He stopped and leaned against what was left of a brick wall. There was one of his hallucinations now just up ahead of him. The husks of buildings on either side of him were about as tall as their knees. It must have been 30 meters tall at least. But its legs were strange. There seemed to be a gap in the middle of each of them. They were skinny. No, skeletal. The skeleton's foot crushed a car right in front of him. The crunch of metal was loud enough to snap Goro out of his stupor. This wasn't a hallucination. Hallucinations can't crush cars. With a yelp, he tumbled backwards, staring up into the haze of dust. He saw the shape of a pelvis. Above it, what must have been a ribcage the size of his house, but the creature disappeared into the darkness and the dust. If it was too tall for him to see its face, maybe it was too tall to see him on the ground as well. The skeleton stopped, standing directly over him. For a second, he thought that maybe he'd be okay, but then, with a great rattling rumble, the monster hunched down low, and the enormous skull appeared out of the haze, flying right towards him. He managed to dodge its gnashing teeth, but it caught his foot, sending him rolling through the radioactive dirt. Goro didn't give himself a moment to recover, though. He took off running as fast as he could, hearing the rattling sound terrifyingly close behind his back. You will be pleased to know that Watanabe Goro survived this incident. With only minor injuries, he managed to navigate his way to the nearest police station, where SCP agents, already familiar with the entity he had encountered, took control of the situation. The so-called starving skeletons had been roaming the bomb sites for several weeks by that point. It was the Foundation's first exposure to one of the oldest known entities that the IJAMEA had been studying for years. To date, 206 separate instances of SCP-2863 have been officially recorded. However, the myth of the Gasha Dokoro had been circulating in various parts of Japan since the 10th century at least. Giant skeletons were said to haunt the sites of particularly deadly battles, hunting by night, and feeding on the blood of their human victims. These myths tally up with what the Foundation currently knows about these entities. Instances of SCP-2863 only appear after sunset and will lose all corporeality when exposed to sunlight in the morning, or any light source over 1.1 lux. To give you some reference for that, moonlight typically falls between 0.25 and 1 lux. A typical room with the light on will be 100 or even 1,000 times brighter. As you can imagine, this has made them virtually impossible to contain, as they manifest and unmanifest outside of controllable conditions. They seem to have continuous existence in some way, however, as previously neutralized instances can and will reappear later on. In folklore, the Gasha Dokoro are spirits that take control of skeletons. Some hesitant researchers have posited that perhaps the instances that dematerialize are returning to their spirit form. Little is understood about what that means in practice. What's more, this SCP cannot be photographed. All attempts to capture them on film or digital cameras have failed, including video tests. It is theorized that there is a link between them not appearing on camera and their disappearance when exposed to light. Again, the link between them is still mostly unknown. Due to a steady increase in urban development in Japan and ongoing peace in the region, appearances of this SCP are growing increasingly rare. While this marks a positive change for the people of Japan, it makes it even more difficult to study this SCP and learn how to prevent it in the future. The most recent fatality to occur at the bony hands of SCP-2863 happened in 2008, and it was part of a Foundation experiment. While most of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had been redeveloped into bustling metropolitan areas, the outskirts of each city, particularly several parks, saw occasional instances of SCP-2863 appearing at night. As such, the SCP Foundation conducted a series of experiments under cover of nightfall, releasing D-Class personnel into a park in Hiroshima to observe how the SCPs hunted humans. Their enormous height, towering at over 30 meters, gave them a huge advantage, being able to chase people down with little difficulty. Another notable thing about them is just how quietly they move. There is a gentle rattling sound that follows them around, but aside from that, they are very light-footed and difficult to detect until they are right on top of you. This isn't helped by the fact that they hunt at night. As a result, they are remarkably quick at catching their prey. Once they have snatched their victims up in their skeletal fingers, they perform the same eating ritual every time. They eat the person and consume their blood. Initially confused by this finding, the Foundation was unsure where the blood was going, as the skeletons had no obvious digestive system. After the release of several more D-Class personnel into the park, they still weren't certain, but they believed that the SCP instances were absorbing the blood into their bones in some way. Further testing was requested, but denied due to the sheer number of D-Class fatalities in the area. They were starting to run out, and would have to ship more of them across to Japan, which was just a bit inconvenient for everyone involved. As the outskirts of those cities have been urbanized, the instances of SCP-2863 have reduced to the point that a smaller contingent of agents and researchers are now left in place. The light pollution from these areas is enough to prevent them from being able to manifest in the first place for the most part. Only on the rare occasion of power outages have Mobile Task Force 03 been deployed. Whilst researching this SCP, the Foundation came across an account from a shinobi in the 1700s. It was rare to find any kind of written document from a ninja for obvious reasons, but the account discovered painted a harrowing picture of just how much damage these yokai could inflict upon a city. The nameless shinobi first encountered SCP-2863 while assassinating an unnamed target in the mountains above his fishing town. Looking down on the fires below him, he saw human shapes walking through the smoke, dwarfing the buildings they moved between, before an instance charged through the trees straight at him. Diving out of the way, the shinobi quickly melted into the shadows. Both man and demon hunted one another throughout the night. He managed to climb onto its spine and inflict what he was certain would be a killing blow to the skeleton, only for his blade to bounce right off the bone. Caught and vulnerable for the first time in his life, the shinobi was helpless as the spirit threw him from its back into the courtyard and charged at him. It was only the hem of the ninja's sleeve catching fire from a candle that saved him. Just as the skeleton was about to bite down on his head, the light flared and the SCP disappeared entirely. For a long while, the man lay in the courtyard, pondering his actions. He should have died that night, yet he survived. Getting slowly to his feet, the man now knew what his destiny was. A monster that strikes from the shadows, scared of the light. He and the Gashodokoru were not so different. Understanding his target was the first step to defeating them. Snatching up a lantern from the ground, the shinobi descended the mountain into the wreckage of his hometown and defended his people. By night, he would emerge hunting down the Gashodokoru under the cover of darkness, banishing them with the light hidden under a dark sheet. The man fought night after night, narrowly risking death to save his people from the onslaught of the evil spirit. A small plaque was installed by the IJAMEA shortly before the Foundation took over the management of the SCP. It was installed at the foot of an old pagoda just outside a small fishing village. On it was a simple haiku: "Walking in shadow, in the midst of our demons, we will find the light."
Jack was swimming deep underwater, wondering why he had such a pounding headache when suddenly he had a terrifying realization. He had no idea where he was or what he was doing. There was a nagging feeling that he must have a specific reason to be here. You don't just end up deep in the ocean with a diving suit on by chance. Yet he had no idea what he was supposed to be doing. He wasn't sure he cared either. He was more worried about the throbbing pain in his head and the vision of two eyes staring at him out of the dark that he couldn't get out of his mind. His heart began to race as he wondered what to do and how to get help. He was in the middle of the ocean and appeared to be all alone. He couldn't see anything in the dark water except for this weird gray substance in front of him. Maybe he was gonna die here alone. Without knowing if anyone could even hear him, he began to speak aloud about how he was consumed by sickness and that darkness was all around him. This is the story of one of the most powerful and dangerous anomalies yet discovered, SCP-3000. Before Jack's descent into despair, the SCP Foundation had mandated an exploratory expedition off the coast of Bangladesh. After receiving a few strange reports from locals and fishermen, the Foundation suspected an SCP was lurking in the water and positioned a few personnel to investigate. The crew expected danger, or maybe even death. But what they got instead was far stranger and more ominous. All of the men had been verified to be in sound mental states when the mission set out, but a few of them reported feeling strange and uneasy as the submarine descended into the ocean. Before long, a veteran agent named Dr. Williams began to panic in a way that was completely out of character. He started sweating profusely, shaking, and wouldn't listen to a word of comfort or reason that anybody tried to offer. It might seem like a relatively normal reaction for anyone descending into the depths of the ocean to meet with a monster that they don't know anything about, but Dr. Williams was a seasoned professional who had been on hundreds of such missions before. There was no logical reason for him to act like this. Although the reaction of Dr. Williams was the most extreme, he wasn't the only one who started to feel strange. Multiple agents developed a creeping feeling of unease that swept over them. One of the calmer men tried to reason with Dr. Williams, asking him what was wrong and if he could explain exactly how he was feeling. That's when things got even stranger. Not only was the doctor extremely anxious, but he now seemed incapable of giving a real response to any questions thrown at him. He could only mutter that he was missing something, but he wasn't sure what. Knowing that many SCPs can bend reality and the human mind, many of the personnel began to have second thoughts about the mission and even asked for permission to call off the mission. But they were mandated to continue, so they went on. As the team went deeper and deeper into the ocean, things only got worse. Even the previously calm crew members became spooked and antsy, while the ones who were already anxious were now sweating and jittering. As for Dr. Williams, he was now pacing back and forth around the submarine, saying things nobody could understand. Every time he looked at his colleagues and his close friends, he seemed to stare straight through them and would call them by the wrong names. It was as if his mind had moved to a different dimension. Whenever someone asked him to perform his normal duties, he looked more confused than ever. Still, the team went deeper. Dr. Williams began to whimper and say the word no repeatedly, growing louder and louder until he was screaming, and the others were forced to sedate him. Just then, something came into view. It was what would come to be known as SCP-3000. The thing was huge, so huge that its whole body couldn't be seen out of the submarine window. It was a horrible eel-looking creature with a head as big as a town and haunting eyes that lit up the black ocean around it. But perhaps the strangest part was this giant eel seemed to be producing a weird gray liquid. Even the sedative wasn't enough to keep Dr. Williams calm anymore. There was a strange blank look in his eyes as if the light and life had left him, and he just began screaming no repeatedly again and wouldn't respond to any attempts to calm him down. Not that anyone else was very capable of calming him down at this point. Even the crew members that had been holding up well were starting to act strangely, and nobody could get the image of these ominous eyes out of their heads. Then things went from bad to worse. Williams began screaming and shouting madly as if he was being tortured by an unseen force. The men tried to restrain him, but it was no use. He began smashing his head against the submarine window until it cracked, putting the whole mission and everyone's life at risk. He fell to the ground injured, chanting that there was nothing, whatever that meant. It was an emergency scenario. They began applying first aid to Williams as the submarine ascended to the surface as quickly as possible before the pressure of the ocean caused the cracked window to explode. By the time they reached the surface, Williams was dead. But there was something even more chilling than the circumstances of his death. Every single man who had been in that submarine experienced the same thing on the days that came afterward. The image of the eel-like creature's eyes seemed burned in their minds permanently. It would haunt their waking hours for the rest of their lives, and sleep was no escape either, as they would appear in both their dreams and nightmares alike forever. A second mission had to be sent to gather more information about the strange beast. Already, there were many theories and question marks surrounding SCP-3000. How big was it really? Was it sentient? What was the liquid for? None of the men who had been on the previous mission were willing to return to the waters, but a new group of brave recruits volunteered. They were about to find out what so many in history have learned the hard way, that bravery and foolishness are often mistaken for the same thing. This time, the mission would not be in a submarine, but in dive suits, in order to observe the anomaly in even closer detail, and to eliminate the chance of one team member self-sabotaging the submarine, killing them all. They were transported to the location by boat, and the three men splashed into the ocean. They descended, and at first everything was going well. In case anything went wrong, the three of them were tethered together for extra security. But the deeper into the ocean they swam, and the closer they got to SCP-3000's location they got, the stranger things became, just like on the last mission. First, there were a few minor cases of confusion. One of the team, Jack, thought it was his responsibility to lead the navigation, but another, Roberto, also thought it was his job. In fact, navigation was actually the job of a third team member, Amir, but he seemed to have forgotten. Everyone was getting confused. The team listening in on the conversations at the Foundation headquarters grew increasingly concerned about what they could hear. Was everyone losing their minds? Hopefully, nobody was about to pull another Dr. Williams on them. Still, the project leads couldn't afford to tell the men to come back to the surface. The Foundation badly needed any information they could get on this SCP, whatever the cost, so they told the men to press on. Things only got worse. Roberto was asking to speak to a colleague who passed away 2 years ago, while the others began to mutter indistinguishable phrases about eyes and darkness, not too dissimilar to the ramblings of Dr. Williams. It increasingly began to look like a suicide mission. Then, there was silence. What was going on? Each of the men had completely lost it, to the point that they cut the tether that was holding them together. All alone, Jack couldn't remember where he was or why he was here. He desperately looked around to try and gauge his surroundings, but he could only see darkness. All he could think about was a pair of large eyes and an overwhelming fear of despair and anxiety, and this weird gray fluid that was now floating in front of him. The Foundation listened as Jack started reciting a creepy speech about being on the edge of nothing, inches from oblivion, with a sickness in his mind and nothing but a pair of eyes in front of him. They listened in horror as they heard movement through the radio. It sounded like a huge creature was swimming toward the men. It had to be SCP-3000, but all three men were too confused to do anything about the situation or to even see what was in front of them, claiming they couldn't see anything in the darkness. There was silence for half a minute, with the team listening in, fearing the worst. Then they heard some more unintelligible mutterings. The men must be alive, but what on earth was going on? Then the gibberish started again. Two of the men were screaming that Jack had just been swallowed whole and that they were being sucked in too. Why couldn't they just swim away? It was chaos. But then a few moments later, Roberto spoke into the radio, saying he was floating alone in the middle of the ocean and had now moved away from the eyes of SCP-3000. He finally seemed capable of forming coherent thoughts and speech. After what had just happened, Roberto now had a theory. He thought that somehow it was impossible to think straight around SCP-3000. When he'd been close enough to see the eyes, Roberto had felt a throbbing pain in his brain and been unable to think about anything. Perhaps it was something to do with that mysterious gray liquid. Even more slime was coming out of SCP-3000 now, and Roberto was determined to get a sample despite the warnings from HQ. In one final burst of motivation, he swam close enough to take some of the gray liquid and put it in a special sample collection unit that was designed to float to the surface for collection later. He had acquired some very important data, but he seemed to have lost all hope of preserving his life. Roberto started telling the team over the radio that he was dying and that his heart rate was too high, but cautioned that it would be too dangerous for anyone to try and rescue him. The personnel continued to try and communicate with Roberto to figure out what was going on, but his words had stopped making any sense until finally he went quiet. Minutes turned into hours, hours into days, and still there was no sign of Roberto or the rest of the divers. After 3 days, his radio, which had only been sending a steady stream of static, finally stopped working altogether and he was presumed dead. However, the sample Roberto had collected had survived and made it to the hands of the Foundation researchers. It turned out to be a viscous substance now known as Y909, a chemical compound and extremely strong anesthesia. Y909 causes head pain, paranoia, fear, panic, memory loss, and confusion, explaining what happened to Dr. Williams and the diving trio. The collection of Y909 might have resulted in 2 disastrous missions, but there's a silver lining as the substance ended up becoming an invaluable tool for the SCP Foundation. Its ability to make people forget what had just happened to them can be used to eliminate knowledge of threatening SCPs among the public. It also helps the Foundation staff cope with the traumatic experiences they encounter on their missions. Although other amnestics can be used for the same purpose, none are as powerful as the one produced by SCP-3000. Before its discovery, the amnestics used would break down too quickly, not fare well in storage, or cause undesirable side effects. The only problem is the method of sourcing. The only way to obtain Y909 is somewhat ethically questionable for most people. SCP-3000 produces Y909 after eating, so the best way to stock up on it is by feeding the creature. Sedated D-Class personnel from the Foundation are sent on missions supposedly to observe the anomaly up close, unaware that this mission is one way only. Other divers are then sent later to collect the fluid from a safe distance and store it. Of course, it's all for the greater good of humanity. Now, the Foundation protects SCP-3000 as best as it can guard something hundreds of kilometers long. The area is carefully patrolled, and members of the public are not allowed to enter the part of the bay where it resides. Anybody who accidentally comes into contact is contained. Eventually, another pair of Foundation doctors went down in a submarine to try and learn more about SCP-3000. One became so affected by Y909 that he began hallucinating. He started talking about Anantashesha, the king of serpents in Hinduism. Anantashesha is believed to be all that will be left after the end of the world because it exists throughout all of time simultaneously. The doctor said he believed that this was in fact Anantashesha, that SCP-3000 simply shows us that eventually everyone dies and fades into the darkness of oblivion, right before he exited the submarine and swam right into his mouth. Luckily for now, SCP-3000 seems to be in a sort of hibernation state. It rarely moves and it doesn't hunt, although it will eat when fed. But no one knows when or if it'll wake, or what it's capable of if it does. Will it destroy the world, or simply drive us all insane?
It's such a beautiful day out here. The air is alive with birdsong and the gentle bubbling of nearby brooks. There are ancient oak trees everywhere, reaching up into the sky and forming a dense canopy. The occasional shaft of light spears through amongst the leaves, illuminating the lush green moss on the ground below, as soft and perfect underfoot as a brand new rug. This might seem like we're just having a pleasant jaunt through a local forest here at SCP Explained, but take a closer look at the trees. This isn't just any forest, dear viewers. That's right. After years of attempted espionage and infiltration, we are here at long last. The Wanderer's Library, the limitless interdimensional archive of all knowledge in the multiverse, often frequented by the Serpent's Hand via portals known as the Ways. Who would have guessed that the secret to getting inside was just asking very politely and promising not to steal any of the books? We should just try being nice more often. But hey, as the dispensers of user-friendly animated knowledge here on YouTube, we felt that we ought to share this bounty of limitless knowledge with you. The wing of the Wanderer's Library we're seeing right now is known as the Hidden Nest. It's a good starting point for new scholars perusing the boundless texts available beyond dimensions. How about we begin with this collection over here, King Shash's Shelf. Try saying that 3 times fast. And then take a look at the inscription above the case.
The Lord of the Lazy. His kingdom is anywhere in which sloth reigns above activity, in the hearts of all those devote to lounging over labor. He and his secret army wage a war against all doers, a battle for the universe that can only end in the cessation of all motion in the universe, or total unstoppable chaos.
Lord of the Lazy, Sounds like me when I clocked off for the weekend. Let's crack the spines on a few of these dusty old volumes and take a look inside. First, we have On the Common Vampire, an extract from the thought-to-be-lost Saint Emile's Bestiary, translated into English by the famed scholar of the anomalous known as Rounderhouse. It is an indispensable source of knowledge for those who are aware of, and rightly fear, the vampires that lurk in the dark all around us. It goes into great detail about the biology of the common vampire, also known as Vampire Draculae, and believed to be the progenitor to all other vampire species, as well as their diet, behavior, and the best methods of hunting them. The following is a brief extract.
Vampire Draculae is largely similar in shape and form to Homo sapiens sapiens, an erect biped with a wingspan roughly equivalent to its height. The most obvious feature discerning them from a human is the shape of their hands. The vampire's hands are claw-like, with long, hard nails extending up to 2 centimeters, often sharpened to a point. The muscles in these hands are taut and powerful. They can be quickly contracted to exert immense pressure on anything in the vampire's grasp. This ability is commonly used to crush the skulls or bones of prey. Naturally, the vampire's teeth are the second source of notability. The fangs of a vampire are stuff of legend, and it is difficult to extricate myth from fact. Dissection of the adult specimens have noted sexual dimorphism in the dental region. While males have 28 teeth to the female's 20, they are less dangerous. 4 of the males can be described as fangs, both front-facing, 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom, each a centimeter above the gum line. Comparatively, females have 8 fangs, 4 on the front and 2 on each side. Her front fangs are up to 1.5 centimeter above the gum line. The legends have preserved one important bit of truth regarding the fangs. They are used almost exclusively to suck blood from the vampire's prey. They bite into the flesh, most often of the neck or thigh, and the vampire uses its lips to create a seal around the incisions before sucking. However, study of their feeding habits has led me to an intriguing discovery. As soon as the beast separates itself from its prey, its saliva soothes the wound and encourages faster clotting. While this is pure speculation, your author theorizes that this is an adaptation to preserve the life of the prey in order to remain a consistent food source.
A truly fascinating piece of technical literature. Next, of course, there is the short but haunting piece titled Leavings of Another World, written by the great thinker Jack Manganese. This tome carries an important lesson to all who wander through the hallowed halls of the Wanderer's Library, about the power of words. But it's not the kind of power you might think. Allow this extract to expand on that.
Words have power. Indeed, they have the power to create, but mostly they have the power to destroy. Does that really surprise you? Let me demonstrate. Please think of an animal, any animal. It could be anything, right? 2-legged, 4-legged, winged, anything. But now suppose I said, think of a quadruped. It can no longer be 2-legged, can it? It can no longer be a bird or a fish. And if I said, think of a black, domesticated feline, your choices are narrower still. And finally, think of Bastet, my pet black cat. At that point, you have no choices at all. You may believe that each step gives you more information, but what it really does is limit your imagination and destroy possibilities. The power to destroy, you see, is much greater than the power to create. You didn't notice because you, yourself, are a creature of thoughts, ideas, language, and ultimately, of words. Suppose I told you there was once a world without language, without ideas, without words.
Of course, world itself is a word, so it wasn't really a world. But we have to call it something now, don't we? In this world, there were no limitations. Everything that could be was. Everything that couldn't be also was. It was a vast place of infinite complexity, but also of infinite simplicity. Since everything that was or wasn't also was or wasn't everything else, the endless variety was, in fact, all the same. You say it's difficult to describe? Indeed, that's the point. It can't be described. It was everything and anything and something and nothing, and all at once and not at all. What happened to it? Words, of course. It started with a single simple word, in a language that no one speaks anymore. No one knows where it came from or how it sounded, but I'll tell you what it meant. It meant red. And as soon as there was red, there was also not red. The world had been neatly cloven into red any every somethings and not red any every somethings. It was the first division, and the very idea of division spawned more ideas and more words. 1, 2, separate, together, us, them, and from these came more, many, many more. The piece then goes on to reveal that the proliferation of language destroyed this world further, until all that was left was the wreckage, our world. How a universe of infinite possibilities is slowly dulled by the ever-expanding power of nomenclature. Truly a disturbing thought for the more metaphysical among you. Let's take another book from King Shasha's collection. Next comes a frightening parable about hubris from the bard, known as Jack of Trades. Like many a classic parable, this piece tells the tale of an intelligent spider, a jack of trades, as the story puts it, whose arrogance forges him into the architect of his own demise. Let's take a look at an extract, shall we? I once met a spider named Jack. A sizable fellow he was, the size of my fist and 8 legs as long as my hand. They were dexterous too, complementing his keen mind. That was where his name came from. Jack of Trades, for with each leg he would conduct each of his trades. With one he was a blacksmith, forging steel like silk, that with another he would spin into death traps. With a third he would contemplate the design of his web, for he was an architect. With the fourth he would climb the tallest of trees and bask in the daylight, so that all would see his splendor and in it take delight. Oh yes, he was proud. Why wouldn't he be? He was the most talented spider to have ever graced the land. His crafts as numerous as they were grand. I don't just weave webs, he said to me. I weave works of art. My traps instruments of death so much finer than all the rest. Then one day, Jack hatched a plan. Up the tallest of trees he climbed. He did not rest for 2 nights and 2 days until he reached the highest branch. The words some proclaim say he could touch the moon up there, but I digress. For one thing was certain. The height he had reached was a thing to impress. What Jack did next was more august still. Working each of his renowned legs, he weaved a web from the base of the branch to its end. So mighty in scale was it that he said it would catch him the sun and make him master of all that it touched. It will bring me the moon too, he told me once, and with the light of the brightest star I shall be master of the night. Catch them he did, for as the sun climbed it found itself twined in the mesh of Jack's web. As for the moon, it soon found itself strewn with Jack's string, which clung to its opalescent veneer as it drew near to its ever-evasive lover, the bringer of day. Now they were tied to one another in Jack's trap for him to reign over. It was thus he crafted himself a throne of sunlight and moonlight, the very heavens made to bow before his majesty. Yet it was not to last. The rest of the tale details the downfall of Jack the Spider as he devours the sun and moon above, driven by his boundless hunger for greatness. Soon enough he was left with nothing to consume, and in his despair, tumbled from his web down to his doom. So is often the way with those pushed by unchecked ambition. Time to blow the dust off of another one of the library's forbidden texts. This one, entitled A Restless Wanderer on the Earth, is a particularly interesting piece for anyone fascinated by the enigmatic life of SCP-073, also known as Kane.
This piece features a person named Bluebird buying a jar containing Kane's memories from a merchant, possibly affiliated with Marshall Carter and Dark Limited. It is a complex tale concerning many small fragments from Kane's life, thousands of years in the past. Here is a brief excerpt. The man found Kane, Ben Adam, in the endless wilderness of the Between Places. The man was beautiful to look upon, with bronze skin and shaggy black hair. His clothing was cut of animal skin, of fashions pleasing to the eye. But Kane was not pleased to see him. The man knew his name. "I am a priest," the man said. "A year ago you passed through my village. I wished to follow you then, but I was held back by the others. Then the crop failed, and a plague swept through our village. Only I was able to save myself, and then there were none to hold me back. I have searched for you since, and now I have finally found you." Kane frowned. He tried to wander only those lands where the soil was wild and suffused with power enough to resist his curse, or else lands where the inhabitants knew how to refresh the lands which his curse had made barren. When he needed to pass through civilization, he avoided the fields. He had long ago discovered that his curse had a limit, 48 cubits around him, or a length similar to 12 times his own height, enough to judge with the naked eye. But that did not account for the times he was not fully aware, often taken with wanderlust, sometimes not even fully awake. He would walk in a trance according to where his feet took him alone. After these periods, he could awake having destroyed the entire harvest for a village. "I am truly sorry," Kane said. The man looked astonished. "You are Kane, the Wanderer, father of the lost children and the great beasts. You are the god of death. The other gods, the lesser gods, could not save my village. I worshipped them once. I despise them now. I come now to worship you." "They were your family," Kane said. "Even if they were not, I cannot be pleased about bringing more death to those who did not deserve it." "You are testing me, my lord," the man's teeth gleamed. "I promise you, I will not disappoint you. I will become your follower and your priest." "Foolish," Kane said and continued walking. The man followed him. It is clear that the curse Kane is forced to carry since committing the terrible sin of murder against his own brother weighs heavily upon him, and the powers he possesses now are both a blessing and a terrible detriment to the normal life he would have led. As with anything involving Kane, it is a deeply tragic tale. Next comes another insight into a normally secretive world, a piece entitled The Exhibition, written by an aspiring artist named Artifacts. The piece details his frustrating experience hosting his artwork at a private exhibition hosted by the sinister members of Marshall Carter and Dark Limited. And, of course, here is a brief extract.
"I had never been so disappointed before. Tonight was supposed to be my big night, the art exhibition that would have defined my career, hosted by the richest men of the anomalous world, Marshall Carter and Dark. Luminaries from all across the multiverse had come to see our work. I remember how surprised and excited I was to see the letter that I had even been accepted into the exhibition. To receive one of these had been my dream since I was a child, learning about all the wonders of the anomalous on my father's knee. Oh, the letter looked so formal with the logo of MC&D printed at the bottom that I thought it sealed my future forever. I spent 5 hours fretting beforehand. I eventually settled on a suit to wear, a black and white chessboard pattern only with actual chess pieces that moved and played games over the fabric. I had specifically requested that it be made with some of the most famous games of history sewn into it. When I looked down at myself, I could not tell which game was which. Before I could second guess my choice of clothing, I looked at the time and realized that I was running slightly late and left in a hurry, rushing to the portal that the letter told me to go, in between a bookshop and a bowling alley. When I arrived, my astonishment at seeing the place was a feeling I would never forget. It was ridiculously surreal, like if MC Escher painted an art museum, and the museum was filled with Escher's paintings, with the paintings themselves being alive. Oh, the chandeliers were made from glowing crystals, almost looking more like disco balls than chandeliers. The crowd there was as impressive as the art, with all sorts of people from all sorts of dimensions, dressed in finest suits, capes, and cloaks that money could buy. As I approached the host, a tall, imposing figure with gray robes, a metal mask, and a mane of white hair, I felt very intimidated.
Yes, I've been awaiting your arrival, Natura.
He was saying to a woman before him, a human with a green dress that I quickly noticed was actually made out of leaves, and dark green hair to match flowing down past her shoulders, with flowers in her hair and clothes.
Your work is waiting for you in the West Wing.
The woman, who I assumed was named Natura, eagerly nodded and looked over to her right. She started walking so quickly she almost bumped into me.
The night didn't go much better for Artifix after that. His NR pieces were a painting of a woman who makes you fall in love, a vase that kills anything put inside of it, and a little statue of an archer who fires real arrows. The representatives of Marshall Carter and Dark were not impressed by this meager display, leaving Artifix, who'd mainly gotten in from his father's business connections, feeling, well, let's say, less than stoked. But the Wanderer's Library isn't all just technical documents and prose. There's also a fair share of spellbinding poetry in these dusty old pages. Take, for example, Stars Wait for No Man, by the illustrious poet who goes only by Dr. Pan. It is a powerful and melancholy piece presented here in full.
The abyss is an infinitude, unknown and unknowable. Creatures with mouths over throats seek insight into their existence, gazing at that which only gazes back. They choke as they look, windpipes bent awkwardly, tears trickling from their eyes, windows reflecting, a goal unachievable. Eyes peer into darkness, searching for more and more, yearning, hoping, desiring, but not doing, never going, weeping at the beauty beyond reach. A number tried, reaching out to the void, but the other scoffed, drowning the doer with tears, all while they rested, their asses in the dirt. An eternity separates that which seeks and that which is sought. Eternity only grows as they gaze on, dreaming, but not doing. Stars wait for no man.
The Wanderer's Library is a truly fascinating place, with so much strange beauty and arcane knowledge to gather up and learn. Would you like us to cover more of the many esoteric volumes in the library's infinite shelves? Let us know down in the comments. And we thoroughly recommend you check out all the full tales in the library itself using the link in the description. Just be careful when you do so. It is so very easy to get lost in there.
The diver screams a silent scream as the giant squid's beak digs into his skin, its many grasping tentacles grabbing him and holding him in place. Nearby, his fellow divers are driven half-mad with terror as they see mysterious figures floating towards them through the murk, and strange Russian voices speaking in their heads. Nobody can help them. They're down too deep, too consumed by the darkness and the pressure of the sea. They're now at the mercy of whatever is inside the submarine. Beginning in the 1940s, with the dawn of nuclear weapons, the American government conducting the world's first atomic weapons test, and the Soviet Union responding in kind with nuclear testing of their own, the two powers entered an arms race fueled by rivalry and a thirst to prove their strength on the world stage. What followed were decades of staggering technological advancements, as each nation tried to outdo and intimidate the other. The Soviet Union crossed into the cold reaches of outer space, deploying the satellite Sputnik. The United States responded with the founding of NASA. Tensions reached a fever pitch during the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, as United States citizens feared they were teetering on the brink of nuclear war. In July of 1968, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States came together to sign the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, agreeing to abandon their pursuit of increasing nuclear power and turn their focus to disarmament. But several months before the treaty was signed, the Soviet government was dealing in weaponry far more dangerous than nuclear missiles, something the other world powers knew nothing about. These deadly secrets were hidden aboard a submarine known as SCP-741. SCP-741 is the underwater wreckage of a Soviet submarine that sank in March of 1968 and came into the custody of the SCP Foundation in 1999. The submarine, a version of the Charlie II class, was deployed under unusual circumstances, which attracted the attention of the United States government. In an attempt to learn more about the submarine, the U.S. government launched Project Redacted, which attempted to recover the vessel from the ocean in the early 1970s. They managed to recover a few pieces of the vessel, though the specifics are highly classified. In the late 1990s, the US government contacted the SCP Foundation, informing them of a possible Euclid or Keter-class anomaly in the wreck. At this point, it passed into the custody and surveillance of the Foundation. The submarine is on the ocean floor, broken into 3 pieces. The hull was broken into bits during Project Redacted recovery attempt, but was largely intact when it first sank, except for 2 holes, one just in front of the sail and one just below the starboard missile tubes. Apparently, the vessel sank rapidly due to flooding after an enemy missile strike, which occurred while it was surfacing. Though all parts of the submarine are accounted for, no members of the crew have been located. Additionally, none of the emergency escape equipment on board has been used, raising further questions about what became of the crew. Wherever they went, they seem to have left something behind. Whenever divers are sent down to investigate the wreckage, they report experiencing anomalous currents and strange sea life, and hearing moans, disembodied voices, and incoherent whispering. They also report seeing blurry, faintly glowing figures. Additionally, the ocean life in the area is unnaturally aggressive, particularly large squid and sharks. This effect was first noted during a manned expedition into the waters around the wreckage, described in Incident Report 1741-A. Divers A-26 through A-30 embarked from the icebreaker Yamal into the waters below with the intention of studying the potential anomalous activity surrounding the wreckage. As the group of divers approached the submarine, they could feel the shift in the water around them, the oppressive feeling of abnormally increasing pressure bearing down and threatening to crush them. If their specialized diving equipment were to fail, they knew that that would be it, and the command would have to come and fish their corpses out of the water. Or even worse, they would vanish entirely, meeting the same mysterious fate as the crew of that doomed submarine. But they couldn't fixate on that. They had a job to do. At first glance, the wreckage appeared undisturbed, unchanged since the previous inspection. Still, they needed to take a closer look to be sure. As the team got closer to the vessel, A-30 was startled by the sight of movement from within the wreckage, spotting motion through one of the holes in the structure as something passed by. He pointed it out to his colleagues, but they dismissed it as likely a giant isopod or spider crab, which were crawling all over the surrounding area. A-30 laughed off his jumpiness, agreed that they were probably right, and continued the exploration as planned. Control authorized the divers to proceed to the next step, and A-29 activated sonar and lights, moving toward the starboard side breach. There, a faint glowing caught his eye. The glow resembled that of radioactive material, but when the team checked the radiation levels in the area, they remained stable. Whatever the source of the glow was, it wasn't radioactive. At this point, his neutron counter began to register something, and all of a sudden, a disembodied voice could be heard saying, "Vasily Yevgeny, can you hear me?" The voice was muffled, and though it could be heard over their communication channels, it emanated from somewhere in the wreckage, deep, deep underwater. As A-29 watched, a glowing shape emerged from the darkness. It was only an outline, the suggestion of a silhouette, but the shape was undeniably familiar. It looked like a person. The other divers quickly noted the apparition too and began to panic. Some checked their nitrogen levels, believing it to be some sort of nitrogen narcosis, while others pointed out that they couldn't all be suffering from nitrogen narcosis at the same time. The unknown voice continued speaking, saying, "Help me, it is getting hard to breathe." The divers debated what to do next, questioning whether what they were seeing was even real, when all at once, the humanoid figure vanished from sight. The divers attempted to shake off the startling encounter, and they resumed their duties, the investigation proceeding as normal. After a few moments of uneventful work, another interruption presented itself in the form of a 5-meter-long squid swimming around the wreckage. Its presence startled the divers at first, particularly those closest to the animal, but the others encouraged them to ignore it, citing the fact that there are no records of these squid attacking humans. So they did, continuing their work as the squid circled them with apparent curiosity. A-27 spotted an unusual shell below the wreckage, notably large and difficult to identify, and Control requested that they bring it up to the surface for further inspection by a marine biologist. The diver began attaching haul cables to the shell as the squid crept closer and closer. All of a sudden, A-26 screamed, and there was a sudden bloom of blood in the water. The squid, despite it being uncharacteristic behavior for its species, attacked the diver, biting him savagely. Prompted by cries for help from the diving team, Control began to reel A-26 back towards the surface, proceeding slowly to give him decompression time, and the squid took advantage of the slow retreat. It chased after the diver, grabbing hold of him and biting down again, tearing away at him as it gripped him in its tentacles. Still, Control continued reeling him in, hoping to free him from the squid's grasp as they yanked him to the surface. The other divers were ordered to get themselves out of there as fast as possible, an order they gladly obeyed. As they swam back to the surface, A-30 saw something else moving in the depths. He couldn't make out what it was, but the sight of it gave him a sick feeling of dread deep in the pit of his stomach. The 4 divers were recovered alive, along with the shell. Examination of the shell indicated that it resembled that of the extinct orthoconic nautiloids, but it was not fossilized. It was taken for further study, given the possible implication of extinct species anomalously manifesting in the vicinity of SCP-714. Diver A-26 lost a limb and was exposed to an unknown venom via bites from the attacking squid. His camera was destroyed in the process. As squid are not known to attack humans unprovoked, this behavior has been attributed to the influence of SCP-741, though the exact link between the two is yet to be determined. An anomalous pressure gradient surrounds the wreck with a radius of approximately 250 meters, starting around the center of the submarine. The pressure in this area is much greater than it should be, given the depth of the waters there. This unusually high pressure makes sonar analysis extremely difficult, as well as threatening the safety of any divers in the vicinity of the wreck. The few records that the Foundation has managed to obtain from the Russian and US governments indicate that the submarine was being used to transport some sort of secret cargo. Though the specifics of this cargo are still unknown, there is reason to believe that it differed from any type of nuclear or chemical weaponry. On a date redacted from official files, the SCP's Basisti was patrolling the area around SCP-741 when its sonar detected some unknown entity approaching SCP-741 from the south at a pace of 46 knots. The crew compared the acoustic signature of the contact with known submarines and torpedoes, but could not find a match. The Basisti attempted to reach the contact via sonobuoy drops and active sonar pings, but it did not respond. When the contact crossed into the total underwater exclusion zone, it became classified as hostile. At that point, the sonar recorded sounds of an undersea missile launch, and Basisti responded with the utmost urgency. The ship broke away from its original area and fired a Type 53 torpedo at the underwater threat. 15 seconds after the Basisti launched its torpedo, missiles of an unidentified configuration were seen breaking the water, flying at a height of 1.8 meters and a velocity of 0.92 Mach. The missiles did not emit any detectable radar, nor did they respond to any launch chaff or flares from the Basisti. Both of the missiles were engaged by Basisti's 3KN-5 Kinsul surface-to-air missiles and Kashtan point defense systems, and were destroyed at 1,800 meters and 210 meters from impact, respectively. After the missiles were neutralized, the hostile vessel could be heard engaging in evasive maneuvers. At this point, there were 4 closely spaced explosions and the sound of a submarine disintegrating. The identity of the attacker, as well as its intention toward SCP-741, have not yet been determined. The incident resulted in the Foundation research team suggesting an expansion of the acoustic sensor net, as well as additional patrol and defense assets placed in the area. Additionally, they advised an acquisition of undersea retaliatory capability. The incident was classified Incident 1741-C. The sonar recordings from the SCP's Basisti during Incident 1741-C were taken for further analysis by the research team. The in-depth review revealed anomalous acoustic signatures that did not match up with any known forms of propulsion, including magneto-hydrodynamic drive. Currently, the nature of the unidentified attacker remains a mystery, and it has not been attributed to any particular government or organization. Following the incident involving the SCP's Basisti, an American intelligence agent reached out to the Foundation, offering further insight into the secretive government programs looking into SCP-741. He agreed to sit for an interview with a Foundation researcher assigned to the project, on the condition that his identity remain protected. The SCP researcher's name is absent from the official file as well.
The two men sat in a Foundation interview room, and the interviewer asked his informant why he chose to come forward, given the US government had simply chosen to sit on this information for 30 years. You've seen those reports. Project Redacted. Now, we know that part too. How the directors didn't make the connection is beyond me. That and the stuff the Redacted pulled up, yeah, the other part you don't hear about is what some of the research team died of. And the crewmen we buried? Just uniforms. Also, the nuclear device we recovered wasn't a missile or torpedo warhead. It was a demolition charge. Does that make any sense? After all those clues, I had to come forward. Why the directorate didn't is something I can't fully explain. This particular statement puzzled the Foundation researcher, raising questions he hadn't anticipated. Only uniforms? Did this mean that the sub had been unmanned? The informant replied, No, not unmanned. There were no bodies, but personal effects were everywhere, along with uniforms. There was some blood, human. Before you ask, on one of the torpedoes and a bit of skin where somebody probably crushed his hand loading the thing. Just no bodies left. When I first looked into all this, I had no clue what the hell had gone on down there, but I started putting things together. The Foundation agent began to speculate based on the mounting evidence. Could it have been a Soviet weapons program? A deadly biological agent of some kind? No, it wasn't that. I thought maybe it could have been, so I dialed up some of my contacts at Biopreparant. Us spies wind up owing each other favors after a while, and they denied it vehemently. Not your usual cover-up baloney either. They clearly stated that whatever the sub was carrying, it wasn't theirs. They wanted no part of it. Sounded like he was gonna puke when I mentioned Redacted. Doctor, do you have any idea what it takes to make a bioweapons researcher sick? Now that wasn't what really bugged me though. What really kept me awake at night was the KGB file that fell into our hands. They mentioned a covert op by the Soviet military against an internal unnamed faction to get rid of a, quote, terrifying weapons that even the Soviet Union can't safely control. They wanted to lose it, whatever it was, or maybe fob it off onto the US. Of course, that all came to light right before the Iron Curtain fell. And given the atmosphere at the time, it was practically impossible to convince the directors that they weren't talking about nukes. And even once I did, they still didn't even think this was worthy of action. I mean, the Redacted would probably have me hanged for treason if they ever find me, but it was worth the risk. And by what I can gather, sounds like Russia thinks so too, loaning you half the Pacific Fleet and all. The interview continued after this point, but the rest of the conversation was considered irrelevant and stricken from the official file. The interview left the Foundation with more questions than answers, though they were more certain than ever that SCP-741 must be kept under strict containment procedures. Due to the object's location at the bottom of the sea, as well as the unusually elevated pressure around it, it is unlikely that many civilians will come into contact with it. However, as an extra protective measure, sonar and submersible monitoring is conducted on a periodic basis in order to verify that the wreckage has not been interfered with in any way. The Foundation contracted Russian warships, SCP Spasisty and Krasnoyarsk, has been selected for this purpose. If any unauthorized activity occurs in the area surrounding SCP-741, nuclear and conventional missiles may be deployed. Any movement of SCP-741 is grounds for an immediate nuclear strike. Whatever secrets SCP-741 holds, whatever it was transporting that was even more of an uncontrollable threat than nuclear warfare, they're better left alone down there, at the bottom of the sea. It was July 2007, and the dry New Mexico heat could shrivel your average outsider into the size of a small keychain. Melinda and Bailey, two young women dressed in impeccable costumes of the Harry Potter characters Luna Lovegood and Hermione Granger, were getting ready for a momentous event, the release of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the final installment in the epic saga of the boy wizard and his quest to defeat the evil Lord Voldemort. They, like so many other cosplaying fans, had driven out to Page One Books, an exquisite bookstore in the very heart of Albuquerque. It was miles from where the two of them had lived, but more than worth the drive to be part of the Potterhead fever, long before the series' author would lose her mind on Twitter and make the books a lot harder for most people to enjoy. Trans rights, by the way. Bailey and Melinda were counting the seconds until the bookstore's doors finally opened, and they could get the answers to so many of their burning questions. Why had Snape killed Dumbledore? Would Harry, Ron, and Hermione find and destroy the last few Horcruxes? allowing them to finally destroy Lord Voldemort once and for all? And most importantly of all, would their ships sail? Mel was Harry Hermione all the way, but Bailey, controversially, was all about Ron and Draco. The two of them couldn't be more excited to be part of literary history like this. The bookstore's doors opened, and little by little, the line fed in. It was worth the long drive in the late evening and facing the sweltering summer heat. When the two of them were holding copies of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows and walking back to their car, they knew it had all been worth it. Mel thought, this must have been how Jesus felt when he finished writing the first edition of the Old Testament. History, incidentally, had never been Mel's strong suit. Melinda and Bailey set off back to their homes in the sticks. Bailey was driving. She'd been kind enough to give Mel a lift, knowing they were probably their neighborhood's biggest Potterheads. It warmed their hearts to see all this enthusiasm for the book series they loved so fondly. Seeing so many others in costume, or with vinyl decals or bumper stickers in their cars declaring their love of the franchise. They'd seen Hagrid grabbing a mocha in Starbucks, Mad-Eyed Moody had been filling up his Buick at the Gas and Gulp, and Sirius Black had passed out from heat stroke and needed to be attended to medically. With an all-black costume in this kind of weather, that much was basically inevitable. As Bailey and Melinda continued their drive, drawing closer to the witchy wilderness of Cibola National Forest, they continued sharing their thoughts, feelings, and predictions about the book to come. They couldn't wait to read it. Was it even possible for someone to be this amped about a book? Their enthusiasm was so great, they didn't even notice, on those long, winding back roads, that another car had started following them. It was 8:15 p.m. now, pitch black, the kind of darkness where bad things happen. Evidently during a lull in the conversation, Mel turned her eyes up to the rearview mirror and spotted the car behind them. It was a car they'd recognize anywhere, a turquoise blue Ford Anglia 105E. To some, this would be a mostly unrecognizable, if a little old-fashioned car, but to Melinda and Bailey, it could only ever be the enchanted vehicle of Arthur Weasley, the father of series mainstay Ron Weasley. The car, which had become iconic since being featured in the books and films, was able to fly and turn invisible, and had gotten the main characters both into and out of a variety of amusing scrapes. Mel told Bailey to take a look, and she couldn't help but chuckle in admiration. Plenty of Harry Potter fans were in town tonight, and some took it further than others. At times, Bailey wondered if her 3 Harry Potter bumper stickers reading, "My other ride is a Nimbus 2000, Save gas, take the night bus," and "All aboard the Hogwarts Express," respectively, were a little excessive. And then there was whoever this was, whose intense Harry Potter fandom led them to buy an authentic Harry Potter car. Neither Bailey nor Mel could make out the driver. The car's windshield was slightly fogged up. Strange, seeing as it was such a hot evening out. They noticed that the car also must have had broken turn signals, because anytime the car needed to make a turn, the driver's arm would slide out the window and make the appropriate gesture. The Ford Anglia kept pace with them, following them at every single turn. It was only then that they noticed something a little odd. The car didn't have a license plate. It was almost as though all identifying features for the car or its driver had been obscured. Bailey, who was getting a little nervous at this point, decided to try out a little experiment. At the next 3 intersections, she took 3 left turns. It seemed improbable that anyone would actually intend to take a route that would lead them in a circle, and yet the Ford Anglia did just that. Bailey's most frightening suspicion was confirmed. They were being followed. She didn't need to tell Melinda, seeing as the bad vibes radiating off the car were already palpable. The two assessed their options. They couldn't drive home. After all, the last thing you'd want is a crazy person knowing where you live. Their best bet was to drive to a heavily populated area, say the center of Albuquerque during one of the most highly anticipated book launches in recent memory, or better yet, the local police station. Whoever was driving this car wouldn't dare try anything there. Bailey and Melinda sped up and took off in the direction of the city, but to their horror, the Ford Anglia sped up in kind. Bailey was pressing the gas pedal down to the floorboards, and still the Ford Anglia gained, its headlights glowing like menacing white eyes. In an instant, it pulled ahead of them, the driver's hand emerging once again. This time, it signaled for them to stop. The two of them would sooner drive their car off a cliff than stop for whoever was behind the murky front window of the Ford Anglia. As the Ford began to slow, perhaps hoping to box them in, Bailey pounded on the gas again and lurched forward, weaving around the Ford and passing it once more. Their 2 copies of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows were rattling around in the back seats. Neither Bailey nor Melinda expected this night to end in a car chase, but it wouldn't be the last time their expectations would be dashed before sunrise. The 2 Potterheads were in the lead again, but it would still be 7 or 8 miles before they were officially out of Cibola National Forest. Bailey drove as fast as she could. She and Melinda were frantic messes of terror and adrenaline now, but the Ford Anglia kept moving, gaining on them with every second that passed. "Go faster, goddammit, faster!" Melinda screamed in horror. "I'm going as fast as I can!" Bailey yelped back. The car merged into the lane next to them and sped forward again. They were neck and neck now, but it was still too dark inside the other car to make out the driver. Just as Mel was wishing that she could have a closer look, her wish was granted in the worst way possible. The Ford Anglia abruptly moved to the side and slammed against them, knocking them off course with a sudden shocking blow. The shock knocked Bailey sideways in the car and yanked the steering wheel along with them. The car veered off the side of the road and tumbled down the grassy embankment towards the trees, taking the 2 unfortunate Potterheads down with it. Before they knew it, their fender was wrapped around the trunk of a ponderosa pine tree. If it wasn't for their seatbelts and airbags, they would have died instantly. But perhaps in the end, that would have been a mercy. Melinda and Bailey sat up as the airbags deflated in front of them. The car was totaled. As the 2 of them shakily unbuckled their seatbelts and climbed out of the car, they were bathed in the light of the Ford Anglia's headlights from above, as though they were about to be abducted by a UFO's tractor beam. The Ford was just waiting on the road above them. Its engine rumbled like a low, bestial growl. The driver was still obscured behind the foggy windshield, but their arm was hanging out of the window once more. Bailey and Melinda were too frightened and dazed by the crash to even move as the car began advancing with unnatural grace down the embankment before them. It clambered towards them with such uncanny intent that it seemed almost like it had a mind of its own, rather than a machine being piloted by a human being. Melinda pointed forwards and screamed. She saw something Bailey didn't. There was something on the outstretched palm of the driver's hand. She thought it was a tattoo at first until she saw it move. 2 human eyes were fixed into the center of the flesh, staring directly at her, like a crustacean's eyes on stalks. Moments later, the car was upon them, and Melinda's scream was silenced. A concerned passerby found Bailey's abandoned car crashed in the ditch beside the road the next morning. The 2 women were never found, and 2 bashed-up copies of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows were discovered on the car's floor, among all the shards of broken glass, never to be read. Some days can be magical, just not in the ways you would have hoped, especially if you run afoul of SCP-3470, a Euclid-class anomaly somewhat cruelly nicknamed Harry Potter's Revenge. Sadly, kidnappings and car accidents aren't that uncommon in this strange, scary world we live in, but at a certain point, the SCP Foundation's many field agents detected a strange pattern in a series of car accidents near Cibola National Forest in New Mexico. In all these instances, the cars had been found crashed, but there were never any bodies. Eagle-eyed police officers studying the crash also picked up on another more subtle detail in all these events. The cars had turquoise blue paint chips on them, even if the cars themselves weren't blue, suggesting the impact of another car. Foundation eggheads correlated this with another strange report they'd received out of New Mexico. A young couple had narrowly avoided a dangerous incident when a car matching the description of a classic Ford Anglia 105E tried to flag them down on a dark and lonely road near Cibola National Forest. Just like Bailey and Melinda, the duo were unable to see the driver behind the fogged-up windshield. However, when they got close enough to see the driver's hand, they both attested that it had eyes on its palm, describing it as similar to the terrifying Pale Man from the movie Pan's Labyrinth. With all of these frightening and clearly anomalous data points in place, the SCP Foundation decided it was time to do their due diligence and go on the hunt for this predatory car. It wouldn't be the first time they'd tackled a sadistic or carnivorous vehicle, and because of this experience, they weren't going in unprepared. There was, of course, SCP-2086, also known as the man-eating bus. These were a species of huge insect-like creatures who'd evolved to perfectly mimic your average city bus in order to lure prey into their bodies. Another notable instance was SCP-1386, also known as the living ice cream van. This being is even more mysterious than the man-eating buses and boasts a wide range of abilities from a hazardous form to a fleshy appendage, somewhat similar to the arm emerging from SCP-3470. The jury's still out on whether either of these anomalies are in any way directly connected to SCP-3470, but it gave the SCP Foundation a few ideas on how exactly to engage, study, and potentially even contain this new vehicular slaughterer of man. As you've probably come to expect by this point, where there are still so many unknown variables involved, the Foundation decided to fall back on Old Faithful, throwing a couple of D-classes at it and just seeing what happened. 2 were selected, placed in a standard Foundation off-road vehicle with dash and rear cams, and given a variety of equipment, including a special semi-automatic assault rifle with armor-piercing rounds, each one containing a micro-GPS that would allow the Foundation to continue tracking SCP-3470 after initial contact. And if, in the process of the experiment, SCP-3470 revealed some frightening new powers, then a standard vehicle and a pair of D-classes weren't much of a loss. Once again, another hapless duo were sent off on the roads in the proximity of Cibola National Park, though the Foundation hoped these 2 would at least end the night accounted for. They patrolled the roads, once or twice remarking on the beauty on the stars above, while not much of anything happened. Command kept close tabs on them back at the nearest containment site, feeding orders through earpieces and watching the live video feeds. As the drive continued, the 2 D-classes finally encountered SCP-3470. They get closer, at which point SCP-3470 begins its typical pattern of hunting behavior. It merged onto the road next to the D-class vehicle and began to slide alongside them. That's when the 2 D-classes realized, and couldn't help but remark, that this looked just like the car from Harry Potter. Was Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry a new group of interest now? Had Lord Voldemort entered into an allegiance with the Scarlet King? This was hilarious. Of course, it didn't remain all that funny to the D-classes for long. The anomalous Ford Anglia suddenly pulled up in front of them and ground to an abrupt halt, forcing the D-class driving to pound the brakes, startling both of them. That's when the human arm slithered out from the Anglia's open window and made the stop signal, before twisting around and revealing the 2 staring human eyes embedded in its palm. The D-classes started to panic and reverse away, while the car started chasing them at terrifying speeds. Foundation Command kept ordering the D-class riding shotgun to live up to his title and blast the vehicle with one of the tracking bullets, but the driver was so terrified, he refused to slow down and give his fellow D-class a clear shot. As a result, the armed D-class released a flurry of shots and just got lucky that some of them happened to strike the car. This caused it to let out a terrible pain shriek, comparable to the squeal of breaking car tires. SCP-3470 then retreated, allowing the D-classes to safely return to base, while Command tracked the Ford Anglia back to its native habitat. It was time for the next phase of the mission to begin. The Foundation brought in Mobile Task Force Lambda-12, also known as the Pest Controllers, a group of operatives who specialize in taking down particularly verminous creatures. They'd be the ones to track down SCP-3470's nest and find out what they were really up against here. In order to complete the mission, 4 members of the task force were designated for infiltration, while 2 others were designated to keep watch outside. The infiltrators were given reinforced armor and a wide selection of weapons and tools, including a flamethrower, a tranquilizer gun, a net gun, and a light machine gun. SCP-3470's movements were tracked back to a cave in Cibola National Forest. When the infiltration team entered, they saw track marks with a familiar tire tread on the floor and walls of the cave, which suggested a number of frightening things about the anomaly they were chasing. As they got deeper into the cave, the air became intensely hot and humid. They found scat piles filled with human bones and a local sheriff's badge, suggesting that the car does indeed eat and digest its prey. But most terrifying of all, the infiltration team discovered a number of translucent eggs, which had small quadrupedal organisms, assumed to be the larval stage of SCP-3470, wriggling away inside. They collected some of the eggs and then burned the rest before turning around to leave. That's when they noticed that SCP-3470 was in the cave mouth, waiting for them. Except this one wasn't turquoise like the other. This one was black. The car began revving aggressively. After a tense standoff in which one of the task force members muttered, "I refuse to be killed by a goddamn Ford," the task force member with the light machine gun opened fire on the car's exposed arm. One of the bullets hit the creature in one of its hand eyes, causing it to let out another pain shriek, and retreat from the cave mouth, allowing the task force to finally escape. The two who were meant to be on the lookout were never seen again. SCP-3470 remains at large, with the pest controllers doing whatever they can to track it down and contain it. The eggs are also subject to further study. In the meantime, be careful who you stop for, because if you end up inside this magical Ford Anglia, an encounter with the Whomping Willow is going to be the least of your worries.
The SR-47 sniper rifle slotted together effortlessly. Even after so many years of combat usage, the weapon was in pristine condition. In all the time Agent Harris had owned the gun, though, the thousands of times she'd fired it, not once had it jammed. And that was fortunate, because she had to move quickly. In a clearing about 300 meters in front of her were their targets. Capable of teleporting in a split second, she needed to be sure that her team would be able to finish the job quickly and efficiently. She looked through the scope slotted onto her rifle and kicked out the bipod, resting it on a tree stump. Now she just had to wait for the signal. She looked all around the marsh, trying her best to spot her fellow agents, but they were also well camouflaged. Even though she knew the exact spot where they would be, she couldn't see anyone. She'd always wanted to see the Himalayas. It had been on her bucket list to climb Mount Everest as a child, but the world had changed since then. Mount Everest was gone. In fact, the majority of Nepal had vanished, replaced by an enormous marsh full almost exclusively of pink ferns and droopy trees that seemed to sag to one side, unable to support their own weight. The most striking natural wonder on planet Earth had been replaced by a landscape that was flat, wet, and alien. Agent Harris curled her finger around the trigger and took aim through her sights. 2 minutes passed. Then the gentle whistle of a sparrow drifted over to her in the humid air. Except, of course, it couldn't be a sparrow. To the best of her knowledge, sparrows had gone extinct. With a snarl of anger, Agent Harris squeezed the trigger. She felt the silent sniper rifle kick her shoulder. If they wanted war, they sure as hell would get it. The destruction of the world began in 2078. Its designation was SCP-Orange-A. And as often happens with these kind of things, no one saw it coming. The SCP Foundation, having dedicated decades to researching potential world-destroying events, was totally blindsided by what happened the day the weasels showed up. Weasels, you ask? That's right. But before we explain, a question for you. Is something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Regardless if you have a clinical mental health issue like depression or anxiety, or if you're just a human who lives in this world who is going through a hard time, therapy can give you tools to approach your life in a very different way. And that's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and more accessible, and this is an important mission because finding a therapist can be really hard, especially when you're limited to the options in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days. It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. There's a link in my description. It's betterhelp.com/SCP Explained. Clicking that link helps support this channel, but it also gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp, so you can connect with a therapist and see if it helps you. And because finding a therapist is a little like dating, if you don't really fit with that therapist, which is a common thing with therapy, you can easily switch to a new therapist at no additional cost without stressing about insurance, who's in your network, or anything like that. So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/SCP Explained. Thank you again, BetterHelp, for supporting this channel. And now, as we were saying about the weasels, a man called Harlan Stump was the first human to make contact with the weasels. He was the groundskeeper at Site 59. Harlan was making his usual weekly trips around the perimeter of the courtyard on his ride-along lawnmower, watching baseball on his phone all the way when, out of nowhere, the aliens appeared. Just 2 meters in front of him, a squadron of 11 weasels materialized. The weasels, designated SCP-Orange-B, stand at a minimum of 3 meters tall. With 16 legs and an exoskeleton carapace, they share a resemblance with terrestrial insects. Their bodies are segmented, composed of a head, primary thorax, secondary thorax, tertiary thoracic cloister, abdomen, and tail. With a hard segmented shell covering their backs and no apparent sensory organs, aside from a radula on their heads, they are an intimidating presence. Most striking about them, however, is the most delicate part of their appearance. On their backs, each weasel has an array of flora growing in a kind of garden. It appears that each weasel has a different array of flowers growing from their backs. Understanding the meaning of these gardens can be difficult, but it appears the more extravagant it is, the higher ranking the individual weasel is. The 11 weasels that appeared before Harlan's stump each had a very vibrant garden indeed, but no more so than the weasel held aloft in an ornate palanquin. Harlan Stump stopped mowing and stared at the aliens for approximately 13 seconds, at which point he let out a sigh, pressed play on his baseball game, and continued mowing the lawn. He spent too many years groundskeeping Site-59 to get spooked by anything as harmless as giant teleporting insects. Just 3 more weeks and he would be retired. Until then, he was avoiding nonsense like the plague. Except his phone had disappeared. Harlan stared down at the empty space, confusion knitting his eyebrows together, before looking up and seeing the handset in the hands of the alien sitting on its regal throne. The smartphone made a loud screeching noise, and then all of a sudden began to flick between snippets of YouTube videos, each clip lasting just a couple of seconds. After a moment, Harlan realized that the alien was using the videos to speak to him. The words were being picked out from all these different videos to stitch together a sentence. Barely.
Hi diddly ho, neighborinos! This is Foundation. Reports indicate Foundation is locally the masters of the universe. Isn't that right, darling? Question mark. Keen to finish his mowing and avoid further nonsense, Harlan had to concede that he should probably talk to these aliens, if only to get his phone back. He told them he liked the gardens on their backs. Why, thank you! Gardening is kind of our thing. Well, quick question. Is your species capable of dying? Harlan gulped. He'd been around long enough to see where this was going. The conversation was brief. Harlan kept glancing at his phone, desperately hoping that these aliens hadn't somehow broken it, and that it hadn't lost his place in the match, until all of a sudden, Harlan's stump disappeared, as did his ride-on lawnmower, his smartphone, and a patch of lawn, replaced by a roughly 10-meter circle of Antarctic ice and snow. No one is certain yet how the weasels are able to do it. All that is known is that they can. The phenomenon came to be known as juxtaposing. Matter from one location could be instantaneously switched with matter from a different location. It is how the weasels first arrived on planet Earth, triggering the event of SCP-001 Orange-A. Orange-A lasted for just 2 hours, but it changed the course of humanity forever. On the 29th of April, 2078, 48.52% of the Earth's habitable surface area dematerialized and rematerialized half a kilometer above the South Pole. Cities and towns from all across planet Earth, one by one, disappeared and reappeared in the air above the South Pole, where they promptly fell 500 meters, causing back-to-back seismic events. Washington, D.C., Beijing, and London were targeted first, followed by Tokyo, Delhi, and then a number of capital cities from Europe. This 2-hour window resulted in freak weather events as minus 50-degree pockets of air, kilometers across, replaced the disappearing cities. It is disputed as to who launched the first nuclear warhead, whether it was done by accident, out of fear, or as a strategic attack against a group of weasels. Orange-A was simply too chaotic and destructive for humanity ever to be able to know what happened in that short period of time. The result, however, was a number of nuclear explosions raging across the planet before the cities in charge of launching them were also transported to the South Pole. While the weasels were capable of experiencing juxtaposition without any apparent physical harm, terrestrial life forms were less fortunate. During the process of juxtaposition, the bonds between each and every cell are broken. While organic life does get transported to the new location, it undergoes immediate liquefaction. Not a single Earth-born life form has been observed surviving a juxtaposition event. In that 2-hour window, 6.9 billion people were killed. Humanity had lost. This event triggered the use of Project Yellow, an emergency evacuation protocol that occurs at the point where the survival of the human race seems to be virtually zero. A small band of specially chosen individuals were evacuated to a pocket dimension, where they were put into cryosleep to wait until the Earth was habitable once again. In the days following the events of Orange-A, the true invasion began. Choosing the Sahara Desert as their arrival point, the weasels started to appear in legions. Millions and millions of them filled the desert sands and went about populating their new planet.
But what was their purpose? Well, fortunately, we have been able to salvage a modest amount of data that can inform us of why they're here and what their plans are. The weasel that first appeared to Harlan's stump just outside Site-59 has been designated SCP Orange Prime. It is believed that this weasel, in particular, is their leader. Whether Prime is simply the leader of this colony or the wider species is yet to be confirmed. Security cameras were able to capture the interaction as it took place within Site-59's grounds. In their conversation, Orange Prime explains their purpose to Harlan through YouTube clips on his phone. Long story short, weasels have come from Homeworld Dimension for fulfill a long-standing mutual agreement with Grandma. This is one of many new homes. This is a pretty nice place for weasels. This land is my land, from California to the New York Islands, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for weasels to garden, to farm, to create beauty, to spread good vibes, to cultivate, to remake, to terraform, etc., etc. Since this encounter, no human has been able to get close enough to Orange Prime to engage the weasel in further conversation. This snippet of footage is all that humanity has to understand why this alien species has slaughtered billions of us. 4 months later, Agent Harris lay flat in the marshlands, firing her sniper rifle at the weasels gathering in a clearing ahead of them. Their operation looked like overkill. It always did. It was of utmost importance that they strike quickly and without mercy. Sustained heavy gunfire from all sides, combined with RPG fire and the use of incendiary weapons, made short work of the weasels. All of these weapons were necessary to pierce the heavy armor that covered their backs. But that was the reason it felt like overkill. It felt that way because the weasels never fought back. They would not attack, defend themselves, help their fallen allies, or even beg for their lives. They would simply stand idly by as they were gunned down. That is, until the incendiary grenades arrived. The pink ferns filling the marshlands caught fire and began to curl and smoke heavily. As soon as that happened, the weasels sprung into action, quickly splashing water onto the leaves, trying their best to save the plants. The incendiary grenades were not necessary. They did very little damage to the weasels themselves. The reason the platoons used the grenades was that it was one way they had found to distress their alien invaders in any way. It was a small revenge they could take for the billions of people who had lost their lives over the prior few months. Agent Harris pumped 5 extra shots into the corpse of a weasel before standing down and going to examine her handiwork. They had been hunting Orange Prime. Rumors had suggested that their primary target had been lurking in the Himalayan region, but that had obviously proven to be false. Among all the bodies on the ground, there was no sign of the fearless leader. Frustration boiled in Harris as she kicked a corpse. The thick shell hurt her foot. She must have broken her toe. At that moment, a rustling noise came from the other side of the trees. Soon, dozens more, hundreds more weasels were walking through the marsh. In a split second, her platoon opened fire. Tracer rounds lashed through the trees, and the orange glow of fire danced in every direction. But there were more weasels, many more of them. Agent Harris felt her stomach knot as she fired her rifle into the crowd. There were too many, simply too many. They were going to run out of ammo before they had a chance to shoot down each and every one of them. And she was right. The firefight lasted for 30 minutes before the remaining soldier ran out of ammunition. Dozens of weasel bodies littered the marsh, floating in the water. Dozens more weasels stood encircling the group. That's when the humming started. Whenever a juxtaposition event occurs, it is always accompanied by the weasels humming to themselves. It is unclear whether this is the cause of the juxtaposition or simply a ritual that they perform, but every soldier has come to know that sound, and each one of them fears it in the pit of their stomach. So they started to disappear all around her one by one, replaced by puffs of cold air with snowflakes still gently hanging in the breeze. The human population of planet Earth dwindled as the weasel population bloomed. Large swaths of the planet were terraformed one by one to make room for alien flora. The South Pole became a larger and larger dumping ground for all the detritus that had once been the most celebrated works of the human race. The Mona Lisa was torn and forgotten, buried under many kilometers of concrete, exposed sewage works, and apartment complexes. And the situation only got worse in October. Acting against prior instructions from the Foundation, the Global Occult Coalition launched Project Popgo, a 200-megaton nuclear warhead directly at a large weasel population center. As the warhead began its descent, the entire sky turned a solid dark blue. Project Popco immediately fell out of contact, as did all satellites that had been orbiting the planet. The sun, moon, and stars could not be seen. The entire sky was just a uniform dark blue. In a desperate attempt to find out what was going on, the Foundation launched a manned rocket in the direction of Popco's most recent coordinates. Contact with the rocket was lost after just 9 minutes. This is the most recent known account of events from inside that rocket. All of a sudden, just a few minutes into the flight, warning alarms started going off all over the cockpit. The radar was picking up a solid object blocking their path. Gathering around the readouts, the crew came to a very quick conclusion that the dark blue that had been filling the sky was actually a solid object that was encasing the Earth. But rather than abort the mission, the crew decided to persevere. Having witnessed so much death and destruction over the previous year, they knew they would much rather go out and crashing a rocket into a blue wall than join the billions of humans liquefied in a pile in Antarctica. Closing their eyes, bracing for impact, the crew readied themselves for their now inevitable deaths, but it didn't come. Instead, the rocket was able to force its way through the dense blue object, falling apart as it went. Ground control lost contact with the ship. Nothing. And then a few seconds of audio. The crew had made it. They had somehow managed to pierce their way through the blue shell that was surrounding their planet, and were out into, not space, the Earth. The entire planet had been juxtaposed. Willkommen! Bienvenue! Welcome to an exclusive behind-the-scenes look at Heaven. Now go check out SCP-001, 15 files protected by a memetic kill agent, and SCP-001, you are the anomaly.